Today is April the 5th, 2026, and we are here to talk about the world, current events, foreign policy, economics, you name it, we'll talk about it in an episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith. Smith.
Hello.
Yo.
How are you?
How have you been, my lord?
Can't complain.
Good. Well, if you need any help complaining, there are a lot of people who are very good at it, so just let us know. We've had a pretty good week here. Got excited by the space program news. That was probably the biggest news item that I've watched in terms of volume of content. For those who don't know, there's the Artemis program, and we are doing another lunar mission. We're going to be slingshotting around Earth, which they've already completed, and now they are, I think, closer to the moon than they are to Earth. And they're going through space, and they're going to research some stuff on the backside of the moon. And this is all kind of moving toward future lunar base. So this is the prelude to lunar base setup, the scouting mission, basically. The next one will be putting more stuff there. But we're looking at the water, because there's water ice on the moon, which means that we don't have to ship water to the moon. That's very convenient, by the way. It would be super obnoxious to just have like dry rock. You wouldn't be able to like use the water that's already there. So there's water. There's, I think, studying lunar dust and its effects on equipment and so on to make sure stuff is proofed for that. But I don't know how much this whole mission cost, but it's very cool. And for me, as a citizen of the world, it's one of the most exciting things that we can do with missiles and rockets. Instead of blowing crap up and killing each other, we could just go places and expand, which is way cooler. So yeah, good job, NASA and Artemis program. The next stage of our voyage begins, I think, is the quote as it took off.
We'll see how long that lasts.
Well,
Public opinion can turn on a dime.
Yep. Well, a lot of that depends on the success of the mission. Like, what do they actually achieve? And also, does everything go smoothly? Do the 4 people survive the trip? Because it's been a while since anyone has done a space stunt. You could say that this is something that doesn't have obvious immediate ROI compared to like an infrastructure project where you build a school or something. Going around the moon and doing this kind of stuff is extremely expensive and requires extreme levels of specialization. But there are a lot of like later benefits you get from leveling up your tech, as anyone who's played like a Civ builder game knows. Like, your tech is better, your weapons are better, you're stronger. Like, it's very straightforward. So sometimes you do science stuff, but that still is going to benefit you militarily as well because you unlock more tech. So yeah, going around the moon, I'm optimistic about it, but this is like one of those things that excites the kid in me of like, holy shit, we're going to the moon again, let's go. And I watched a little discussion with Neil deGrasse Tyson on it. There's someone who's asking like, so why did we go to the moon? And he's like, you have to think about it this way. We need checks to clear with Congress to be able to afford this. So how do you get the United States Congress to agree to go to the moon in the first place during the Kennedy administration? Do you say, well, we need to advance society and we need to reach the stars and we need to research and like make a major scientific breakthrough? They're never going to sign those checks. You say, look at what the Russians are doing. The Soviets have a dog in space and they have a man in space and the world won't stop talking about it. We're getting styled on right now. Congress instantly signed the checks. Instantly. That's all it took, was the threat of losing the space race to the Soviets. So all we have to do is change our rivalry from like blowing each other up to like space stunts. That's our peaceful endgame.
Yep. But we don't have a Cold War anymore. There's not as much of an imperative. And one of the reasons public support turned on the space program back in the 70s is because of a whole litany of crises that had the public thinking much more about terrestrial affairs than anything going on in space. And that eventually led to the end of trips to the moon. And we're kind of in another era like that. So I don't know that public support for this will necessarily last.
We'll see. I think it's awesome. It's one that can be way more covered than previous manned missions in space. They've got like an Instagram page where they're doing regular updates. They're just talking about regular stuff. My family ended up randomly bringing it up, and they browse different news than I do, so they've been doing a pretty good job of publicity from what I've seen. And there's not really much to dislike about it, which I think is refreshing. It feels pure-ish. Like, there's probably bad stuff that happens at NASA to some extent, but the endeavor itself seems noble and awesome. So I think it's a
very
good
cool.
booster.
I concur. Yeah, I don't follow it too closely, so I don't have much to say about it. It's been in the cards for a while. It's just kind of been in the background. Seems like every politician, every president for the past couple of decades has come out and talked about going to the moon again, generally to try to cover something stupid they did that was in the news. So, there's been planning, but it seems like it's finally, after several decades, come to fruition. We'll see what they do with it.
Yep. There's a comedy skit from, I don't know, like 2013, 2014, by a troupe called The Whitest Kids You Know. And the skit is called Space Bears. And it's a United States government press conference where the person in the administration is basically telling people that there's an intergalactic drug cartel that is like manned by bears, and they just live on the moon and they use their bear rifles and so on. And they're like sort of buying into this a little bit. The people who are interviewing and the journalists, they're kind of buying into it, and then they're like kind of raising their eyebrow at him and being questioning of it. And then one of them randomly asks, "We're invading Iran, aren't we?" And then the guy's like, yeah. And he admits it and stuff. It's just like really absurd, but the fact that it was invade Iran was, I don't know. It's something that's been talked about, I guess, for a while. But we got to live to see it, for better or worse.
Oh, God. For worse.
Well, not exactly
sure.
invade, but kind of.
Yeah, there's still time.
Yeah, that's true.
There's still time. Yeah, there's been talk about conflict with Iran going back decades. I remember back during the early war on terror, there was talk about it. There was even a scare briefly. There was some woman working on an aircraft carrier who leaked to the press that her ship's deployment to the region was in preparation for a conflict. So she said. And that led to a big kerfuffle in the news. And the Bush administration at one point also trotted out a munition that had been used against U.S. troops in Iraq and made a big press conference out of it. They made the argument that it was actually from Iran, right? The idea being that they were trying to very clearly lay the groundwork for linking violence against U.S. troops in Iraq to Iran. And a lot of people just assumed implicitly that they were trying to lay the groundwork for some kind of future operation against Iran of some kind. Nothing ever came of it, but it was always assumed that it was something they wanted to do. So when you say that people have been talking about it for a long time, yeah, definitely. Several decades now, in fact. But nobody ever went forward with it because the cost-benefit really didn't check out. It really wasn't sufficiently in America's interest to do so. But apparently the Trump administration feels differently about it. Well, did you see the news about our favorite fuck plane enjoyer?
No, what happened?
Oh, her husband was outed as a cross-dresser.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
That was so goofy.
That came out of left field for sure. Got an advisor to help him with bimboification.
Is this the
Wild stuff.
distraction for something else? Because this would
Oh
be a
no.
really good distraction for stuff.
No, we're well beyond the realm of distractions.
Uh,
No, this is just random dumb shit happening in the 2020s. The random event generator is out of control, Neuro.
I see.
Well, beyond that, the Attorney General of the federal government was also, well, not also, but was ousted. That was Pam Bondi. She was removed.
Oh, why?
Nobody really knows. Trump isn't really talking about it. Basically, just gave her best wishes, but hasn't really elaborated. So we'll have a new AG soon. Probably doesn't augur any significant change in administration policy. But we'll see who he ends up with. Well, was there anything in particular you wanted to get to?
I don't think if anything in particular stood out to me. Aside from the space launch, not really. But the Dow. Why are you talking and yelling about these issues? Have you seen the Dow today? We should be rejoicing.
Yeah, what was it she said? It's over 50K. Why aren't we talking about that? Yeah, it's a goofy decade. Oh, by the way, you mentioned that hasn't really been a lot going on with space. China's been doing a good amount with space, actually. Their space program has been very active. I think they have their own moon mission in the works, if I'm not mistaken.
Good. That's what we should be competitive about.
I don't even know that we're really even competitive about it. There's not really a race going on like there was during the Cold War.
And that's how you fall behind, is you don't know that it's a race until it's too late.
Well, I don't know about that. No, they're just kind of on their own schedules, pretty much. China wants to do it for their own reasons, and the US pretty much for its own reasons. I think there's just a lot of people that like space stuff and want their politicians to vote for it. There's really not a strategic impetus anymore. But yeah, China has a moon mission in the works, and I think they've also made their own space station. Yeah, I don't remember if they've completed it yet, but they have been working on it. And I think they did send some people up to live in it for a little bit. So yeah, they're definitely making progress over there. Well, the main thing I had today was the Iran update.
As expected.
It's pretty much as dour as you might expect. So are you sure there's nothing else you want to get to first?
Chat, do you have a country? How is Venezuela doing?
There's not a lot new there. Let's see. Yeah, I didn't have any new items in my notes. So status quo ante as far as I know. I did go out and find a map of their oil reserves. I'll send that to you. So you can kind of see visually which areas are being open to foreign investment and which ones they're being more conservative about. Let's see if I can find you for... Oh, there we go.
I'm putting this in Twitch chat. That should be an image. I see. So inner Venezuela, further from the water, basically has nothing.
Correct.
It's mostly concentrated on the coast.
Yeah. So it's that inland pink area, the light pink area, that they're opening up to foreign investment. I mean, technically they're opening up all of it, but the focus seems to be on that. They've been a lot more cagey about opening up the other fields.
Are these just the next like best place to farm the resource, and they're getting outside help to do so?
These are not necessarily the next best. These are some of the most difficult to extract because they're in remote locations. And I think they have to use more advanced techniques to get it out. I don't know if it's necessarily fracking, but I think the actual extraction itself is also more expensive.
Venezuela's like, world, we have a lot of oil. And the world's like, okay, well, let's talk about investing. And they're like, I think you should know about the oil. It's super deep in dense jungles that are super dangerous. Oh.
Yeah, they don't mind opening that up.
Yeah.
Even if the Trump administration gets its way and actually gets oil companies to invest in the first place, it'll be years before any of that investment really amounts to anything in terms of actual new production. And by then, Trump will presumably be out of office. Presumably. So the Venezuelan government is being pretty smart here. If I'm right anyway, they're playing for time. And by the time a new administration comes in, there could be some significant changes in the relationship, to put it mildly.
Yeah, the international like policy action of delaying the action is very strong. You can do that in so many situations where you agree to do shit and then you just delay, which ends up causing stuff to change, so maybe you don't have to finish that job.
Yeah. Yeah. The world's come a long way, but a lot of political and military competition comes back down to siege warfare. How long can you hold out versus the guy laying siege? Tends to drag things out, but it's effective. But yeah, that's all I had on Venezuela.
So yeah, space stuff was cool. And then people's husbands getting outed for their kinks.
Sorry, I didn't mean to ruin the vibe.
No. That's very valid news, and people like the weird ones. Well, you can basically say that any given person has stuff that they're excited by, and there's certain stuff that is more traditionally accepted versus less traditional. And this is maybe less traditional, more modern, but I don't think it's anything illegal. It definitely casts an even weirder light on Christy Nome.
Yeah, I was going to ask, has there been any reaction to that in South Dakota?
No one's talked about it yet.
Oh, that's too bad.
They have a lot of the jokes about gender norms and so on, and wokeism and all that. So it may come up eventually. We'll see.
Well, we might get through the Iran update a little quicker this time. I don't have as much. There hasn't been as much change in the trajectory of the conflict. I'll probably spend more time on the international diplomacy aspect since we skipped that last time, since I wasn't feeling well.
Gotcha.
Actually, now that I mention it, that actually cleared up really quickly. And the symptoms had pretty much gone away by the next day, so I don't really know what the deal was last week.
Oh. Or maybe you have a mutant gene that gives you a higher healing factor.
Very much doubt that.
Would be helpful, though.
You won't get any disagreement with me on that count, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe allergies or something. It is pollen season right now, but anybody's guess. Well, as far as information on objectives, since we still don't entirely know just what the Trump administration is trying to do, I've already talked about my best guess, and I still stand by that. But the new information over the past week has basically just been mixed signals. We got some mixed signals on commitment. In one Truth Social post, Trump said he was considering just walking away from the Strait of Hormuz, just ending the conflict and leaving Iran in control of the strait. Although that could be a bluff to try to get international intervention. But then in another post, he said that Operation Epic Fury will continue until our objectives are fully achieved. And he claimed that Iran would be brought back to the Stone Ages.
What?
Yeah. So that indicates that he's kind of in it more for the long haul. So which of those is more indicative of what he's trying to do and wants to do and how committed he actually is to doing it? Who the fuck knows? It's unclear. We also got some mixed signals on whether or not degrading Iran's nuclear program further was a major objective here. He had one post saying that, well, suggesting that his objective was more to do lasting damage to the nuclear program, more so than was done in the strikes last year. So instead of setting them back a year, maybe setting them back multiple years or even a decade. But there was another post where he said that the nuclear program actually wasn't that important. He actually, well, actually not a post. He told a Reuters journalist that he didn't care about nuclear materials and that the US would monitor them via satellite. Yeah, so I'm not real sure how to interpret all of that. Inconsistent messaging is a hallmark of the Trump administration and kind of always has been, so not necessarily surprising, but it makes it very hard to do any kind of confident forecasting. So more uncertainty, basically. Let's see, as far as negotiations with Iran, I didn't really have anything new, but Iran did signal in the past week that it wants security guarantees. Specifically, the quote is, "We will not tolerate the cycle of war, negotiations, ceasefire, and repetition of the pattern." Now, it could be that they're signaling here more to the international community than to the United States itself. The Trump administration is kind of correct that the international community wants the strait open. But the Iran government kind of knows that and is signaling here that their reasons for closing the strait are legitimate from their perspective, and that the blame for the closure of the strait should lay on the US government and not on them. So I think that's what they're implicitly signaling with that message. Let's see, as far as domestic politics, did you see Trump's speech this past week?
No. What did he speak about?
He basically just gave an update on Iran and restated a bunch of stuff that he'd already been saying. There was actually no new information presented. It was a primetime speech, and there just wasn't much there. Nominally, he seemed to be wanting to build more public support for the war after the fact, but doesn't really seem to have succeeded. Also, his administration is asking for $200 billion for the war and for a $1.5 trillion defense budget. And I think we talked about that last week, but the new thing he did this past week is asserting that the US government needs to focus on quote-unquote military protection and that social spending should be the purview of states, basically saying that increased military expenditures should be paid for with social spending cuts. And the public received that about as well as you might expect. That's sort of Eisenhower's old guns and butter commentary. The public really doesn't like trading off butter for guns.
Was
Have
that
you
an
tracked
actual
the...
trade?
Huh?
Was that an actual trade, butter for guns?
It's a metaphor from economics, basically. The butter is a metaphor for social spending of one kind or another. And then the guns is military spending.
Okay.
So economists simplified that to guns and butter. You can have more of one, but then you have to trade off the other. Economists generally use it to emphasize that when you spend more on the military, you're not spending on the economy, not investing in it, either through tax relief or through social spending of one kind or another. So the economy suffers when you spend more on the military because that's basically a deadweight loss. Money spent on guns, bullets, munitions, missiles, what have you. Once that stuff is used, it's gone. By contrast, when you invest money in the economy, into factories and other sorts of capital investments, you get money back over time that employs people and grows the economy. Should probably read more economics. I've been reading lots of foreign policy stuff lately for obvious reasons. Well, I'll throw out the usual disclaimer here before I forget. I'm not an expert in everything I talk about on here. I have more of a background in foreign policy and economics. So if I ever say anything wrong, stupid, or biased, please let me know. If I'm wrong, I want to know more than anybody. So participation by chat is encouraged in that regard. I don't read chat while we do this, but I will read it later. And we do enjoy the feedback we get.
Thank you, chat.
Okay.
Oh, question. Did you hear about the fighter jet? I think that was the one thing my family mentioned. We had a F-15 go down and 2 pilots.
That's actually exactly what I was about to ask you about. Had you been following that?
Nice. Good timing.
Well played. Yeah, that was sort of the weekend of drama over the past couple of days. Actually, there was a bunch of stuff that kind of happened all at once, and the F-15 story kind of crowded out the other stuff. So an F-15 was shot down over Iran. I think it was an F-15E because it actually had 2 crewmen. There was a pilot and then a weapons officer. And the pilot was recovered pretty quickly, but then there was the question of what happened to the weapons officer. And he ended up kind of wandering around trying to evade capture until he was actually retrieved, I think today, or at least very recently. So they were both extracted. But a couple of days ago, when the F-15 was shot down, there were 2 other events that also happened. One is that an A-10 crashed in the Persian Gulf. The pilot survived and was rescued. And then a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter was apparently hit while conducting search and rescue for the crew of the F-15 that had been downed. No casualties from what I read.
Yeah, it's making me think of the value of pilots. Like, there's the general good human sentiment of if you lose people, you want to go rescue them and recover them. But for pilots especially, that's a highly trained role that is usually in high demand for how difficult of a job it is. So if you lose a pilot, you would like to pick up that pilot if you can.
Exactly. You don't want to lose them. That's kind of always been the case. But it's even more so now because it takes longer, basically, to train them. You know, the aircraft have become more sophisticated. Also, you just don't want them to be captured. There's that, too. That becomes a big bargaining chip for whoever gets them. Yeah, the rescue mission apparently did not go exactly according to plan. From what I was reading, there was a couple of... have you ever heard of an HH-130?
It sounds familiar. What is it?
It's basically a C-130 that's been heavily modified for special missions. In this case, search and rescue. So they sent some in along with, I guess, some helicopters to provide support. And something happened. What I read is that they got stuck somehow. I'm not sure what the hell that means, but they apparently had to be destroyed on the ground so they didn't fall into the hands of the Iranian government. And apparently at some point an OH-6 was lost. That's a ultralight helicopter used for scouting. And it was probably sent along with the mission to provide some limited air support. So I haven't read anything about what happened to it, but it apparently crashed. At least one of them did. Mm-hmm. So the losses include 2 HH-130s and 1 OH-6. That's what I have in my notes. Yeah, apparently Iran is where search and rescue goes to die. Because I remember back during the hostage crisis in the early 80s, the Carter administration actually tried a high-risk, high-reward hostage retrieval mission. That was Operation Eagle Talon. And they sent in some specialized C-130s as part of the mission, and they ended up losing them both. If I remember correctly, the issue was, well, maybe not both, maybe it was just one, but the issue was that there was a MH-60, I think it was, which is like a modified, oh hell, what were they called? Stallion, Sea Stallion, H-60 Sea Stallion helicopter. Basically, one of the largest helicopters the military has. Sent along on the mission, ended up accidentally crashing into one of the C-130s during the mission.
Whoops.
And so they ended up having to scrap the whole thing. And so there was a bunch of dramatic footage of a burned out C-130 and the helicopter and whatnot that made the news. It was definitely damaging to the Carter administration's credibility. So this didn't go nearly as bad. They actually did get the person they were looking for, but yeah, that's the second big retrieval operation in Iran that's ended up eating some C-130s.
Yeah, I had heard that Carter was perceived as a weak president for his lack of military success, but he also was more dovish in his nature, so he wouldn't have tried as much.
Oh, but yeah.
I didn't hear about that botched rescue mission.
Oh, Eagle Tower?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been pretty wild if it had succeeded. They aimed to get out all of the hostages. Mm. Very, very risky operation, but they figured it was worth it. But it just didn't work out. Lots of coordination problems. It's been a long time since I've read about it, but one of the things I remember is that Special Forces took a lot of lessons learned from that and ended up gleaning a lot and perfecting their operations significantly. A lot of stuff regarding joint operations, coordination, planning, all that kind of stuff improved afterwards. Because beforehand, that was all kind of lacking and contributed to the failure of the operation. Yeah, they did much better later in the decade when they ended up doing something similar in Panama when they were sent in to retrieve Noriega involuntarily. They weren't trying to rescue him, they were trying to capture him, but similar deal. Let's see. But yeah, that's the gist of the weekend drama. That was the F-15 story in a nutshell. I suspect there's going to be a movie made about it at some point because it is quite dramatic.
Rescue missions are cool. I support it.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, some Army firings. So Secretary of Defense Hegseth apparently asked the Chief of the Army to resign without giving any specific details as to why. After the fact, I later read an article suggesting that he was asked to step down because he disagreed with the Secretary of Defense's decision to block the promotion of several top Army colonels to one-star general. And we don't really have details as to why Hegseth did that either, but it was noted in media that all of the people whose promotions were blocked were either black or female. And now we're seeing that the chief of the army is being asked to resign. So people are kind of connecting the dots on that. Still nothing confirmed officially, though. And I think today there were 2 more officers fired. I never got the identity of one of them, but the other one was the Army's top chaplain. And I haven't received any official word on why the chaplain was removed. But I did note that there was a scandal, I think either yesterday or today, involving Hegseth running a special religious service at the Pentagon that was Protestant only instead of non-denominational like it normally was. And apparently some Catholics were unhappy about that. So it could be that the chaplain's removal was related to that, but that's pure speculation on my part. Yeah, apparently Hegseth has been holding regular evangelical, not sure what you would call them, Bible readings or something at the Pentagon.
Bible study.
Yeah, very unusual for a Secretary of Defense to do that. Let's see. So Strait of Hormuz, the president did some more whining about the UK. Let's see. I have the quote here. He said, "Go get your own oil from the Strait of Hormuz." Quote, "You'll have to start learning how to fight for yourself. The USA won't be there to help you anymore, just like you weren't there for us," unquote. That's a Truth Social post. Let's see. And then there was a parliamentary committee in Iran that approved plans to impose tolls on traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. And under the plan, US and Israeli ships, as well as other countries that have ships from other countries that have participated in sanctions against Iran, would all be barred from moving through the strait. So nothing all of that surprising. You know, Trump complains about allies, especially vis-a-vis Strait of Hormuz, pretty consistently. And Iran has been making noise about exacting some kind of fine or toll on traffic through the Strait of Hormuz since they closed it. So basically just more traction for pre-existing trends here. I have to say, I don't really find the Trump administration, well, Donald Trump specifically, and his threats about walking away from the Strait of Hormuz entirely credible. Because if Iran did close the strait and remained in control of it after the US walked away, it would not just be closed to much of the world's commercial traffic, it would also be closed to American warships. And I find it hard to believe that the Trump administration would settle for an outcome to the conflict in which the US has less access to the Persian Gulf and its naval bases therein than it had before.
Yeah, that would be a step backward.
Yeah, it's strategically a big step backward, which would be very embarrassing for the Trump administration. So I suspect a lot of this whining is done for theatrical reasons, both for a domestic political audience and to try to intimidate allies into doing what he wants. I don't think it's going to be all that effective either way, but I don't think it's credible correspondingly. Let's see, economic impact. So we've talked before about the impact on oil, natural gas, helium. I don't think I've mentioned aluminum yet. I might have mentioned it in the first week, but just to cover my bases, aluminum is also being impacted. A lot of countries in the Gulf region are major aluminum producers, and so the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is having a knock-on effect of significantly increasing prices in aluminum markets. Some of that could last a while, even if the strait opens, because the Iranians, in retaliation for strikes on their own industry, have started to target aluminum production sites. I don't know if you should call them factories or not, but aluminum producers in the region have been targeted by Iran, and some of them actually have been hit. And that brings me to my next section, energy. So we talked a little bit last week about how there had been threats about going after energy targets in Iran. Trump specifically had threatened to do that if the Iranians didn't agree to a deal. And the Iranians said that there would be a tit-for-tat retaliation if that happened. And I noted last Sunday that the tit-for-tat already seemed to be happening, and that unfortunately has continued over the course of the week. The damage hasn't been too extensive, but the more time goes on, the more damage is done. So let's see, for the US and Israel, they hit the area around Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant. It's apparently been attacked for the 4th time since the conflict started. And the US and Israel also targeted a petrochemical complex in the city of Mashhar, which is apparently one of the biggest and most important centers of oil and petrochemical processing in Iran. Netanyahu says that Israel did that one very particularly. So I haven't seen Trump come out and condemn him for it, so presumably this is now just part of the plan. Iran, for its part, has retaliated and hit some energy-related targets in Gulf countries. The specific example I have here is Kuwait's Ministry of Oil building, which was apparently hit recently. So depending on how much damage is done here, this could have dramatic short to medium term effects on the energy markets. If the Strait of Hormuz opened without any damage being done to energy production facilities, production could start within a couple of months, maybe. There would be a lead time before they could resume production, pre-war levels of production, but they could probably get there relatively quickly. But if physical damage is being done to export terminals, oil refineries, etc., all of that getting damaged means that recoveries are going to take much, much longer, and prices then, even in the event that the Strait opens, could remain elevated for a considerable period of time. So all of the bad things that we predicted might happen are basically coming true.
Shit.
That's the short of it. And in that regard, it gets worse. Referring to airstrikes by the US and Israel and the target set that they're using, the target set over the past week has expanded pretty considerably. Before, they have been focusing mostly on ballistic missile-related targets, including not just the missiles themselves and their launchers, but also the military-industrial complex within Iran that produced them, as well as related fuel and other inputs. Since then, they've branched out. They've started hitting the nuclear program a little bit more. They've started hitting occasionally proxies in places like Iraq and Lebanon especially, although that's much more Israel retaliating against rocket attacks in that case. But in the past week, they've started hitting civilian infrastructure of one kind or another. There have been nominal rationalizations from Washington and the Israeli government about this. They say that these targets are peripherally related to military production or military logistics or what have you, but these excuses feel increasingly weak, especially as the target set expands more and more over time. For example, they hit a desalinization plant. Well, a desalinization plant on Iran's Keshem Island went out of service due to an airstrike. It's not clear to me if the plant itself was the target or if the airstrike hit some other target that indirectly led to the plant being shut down. Regardless, anything affecting desal plants is going to be a big deal in the Middle East. Let's see, steel. So 2 of Iran's most important steel plants had to shut down because of strikes directly on them. Once the conflict ends, it'll probably take, from what I read, 6 months to a year for them to be able to reset. The Iranian government also says that there was an attack on their largest pharmaceutical company. Israel didn't deny it. They've taken credit for it, in fact, so this seems to be true. They say that the company in question transferred chemical substances, including fentanyl, that were used for research and development of chemical weapons. Maybe. That may or may not be true. But the Iranians have pointed out that the company in question also produced drugs, just for medical usage. So not looking great there in terms of the targeting. They really ought, that is to say, the Israeli government and the US government really ought to be more transparent there about the reasoning, as is not really entirely sure I can believe that. Let's see, there was also a bridge that was blown up. The bridge in question was actually, what I read is that it had been under construction, but that it had just completed, but had not yet opened when it was destroyed. So there has not been systematic targeting of bridges yet, but they did hit one that was about to open. And the rationale given in this case was that the Iranian armed forces are secretly trying to move missiles and missile parts from Tehran to launch sites in western Iran, and that the bridge also would have provided logistical support for the military in Tehran. So that said, while this is the only bridge that has been targeted thus far, a U.S. military official did tell Axios, a media outlet, that more bridges in Iran are likely to be targeted. And it's worth jumping ahead a little bit here and pointing out that Trump over the past week has been threatening to blow up more infrastructure like bridges if Iran does not meet his deadline, by which he expects them to reach some kind of deal with him. So it's looking like we're going to be hitting a lot more targets like this in the next week, assuming the Iranians do not in fact come to the table, which you kind of have to assume they won't. Also, a cement factory was hit in southern Iran, and apparently a hospital was hit. I'm not sure what the logic was with that one. That was the Delaram Sina Psychiatric Hospital, which apparently sustained significant damage in a strike today. Haven't really heard any elaboration on that one yet, so I'm kind of curious what the details are. So the list goes on here. Beyond civilian, economic, or infrastructure targets, there's also been universities in Iran that have been hit. The Iranian government says about 30. Some of these seem to be related to Iran's nuclear program, albeit in some cases peripherally. But in other cases, it's not really clear what the linkage is and why they were targeted.
What is it, their chemistry and physics departments?
That seems to be the case, or something like that. So the list I had here included Shahid Beheshti. I'm going to butcher these pronunciations. Shahid Beheshti University in northern Tehran. Apparently, their Laser and Plasma Research Institute was targeted. Tehran Science and Technology University was also hit, specifically one of its research centers and a couple other departments. Let's see, they apparently had been working on domestically made satellites, which could mean they're linked to missile program development. A little unclear.
This is definitely in the department of they're kind of hitting general sciences that could lead into this.
Yeah, like I said, the target set is being broadened considerably, and the targets have less and less direct connections with the Iranian military.
And we think that doing this is going to make them give up faster?
I have to assume that's the logic. They seem to want to increase the pressure incrementally over time in order to increase the pain, in the hope that the pain will reach a threshold beyond which the government will want to ask for a ceasefire, presumably on the American government's terms. I don't think that's going to happen. The Iranian government has been pretty recalcitrant on this, has been preparing for conflict with the United States, and is also run by ideological nationalists who believe they're defending the country's sovereignty against an imperial power. I don't agree with Tankies on very much, but their reading on Trump has been pretty accurate, at least in that regard. He is acting like an actual imperialist at this point, at least vis-a-vis Venezuela and Iran. So no surprise then that a lot of the anti-colonial sort of vestiges of the decolonization period in the mid-20th century are kind of being activated here. Like, this is the kind of conflict nationalists in the developing world have always been afraid of. So I think they're probably going to stick this one out as long as they can. And that's probably going to be several more weeks at least. Let's see, the US and Israel also attacked the Pasteur Institute in downtown Tehran. Apparently, they work on infectious diseases and produce vaccines and biological products and provide advanced diagnostics. That's another weird one. I'm not sure what the rationale there is. And the Iranian government seems to be convinced these strikes are going to continue, and so they've actually announced that all classes will be held online until further notice. Let's see. So this continues. Did you see Trump's social media post today?
Thankfully, no, but what is it?
Oh, you're in for a wild one then, Neuro. This has been the talk of the town today. So I'll read it verbatim. Tuesday will be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day, all wrapped up in one in Iran. There will be nothing like it. Open the fucking straight, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch, all caps. Praise be to Allah, President Donald J. Trump.
Wait, what?
Yep, that's it.
He said, "Praise be to Allah."
He did.
He said
That's all
that.
there.
Does he know that he
That's
said
in the
that?
post. He does.
He needs to get consistent with his messaging here.
Make of it what you will, but the important thing here is that he is threatening an escalation in the targeting of power plants and bridges if the Iranian government does not meet his demands. So his approach to these negotiations seems to be pure violence. He's just going to ratchet.
This kind of post, it makes me think that the process for this getting done is he ducks away to the bathroom for like 20 minutes and he's typing this up on his phone in the bathroom. And then he hits send before talking to anyone about this. She's like, open the fucking straight. It's so silly.
Yeah, that's just another marker of his lack of professionalism and his just inability to rise to the job. It was said back in 2015, more than a decade ago now, that he was unfit to be president, and that's pretty much been proven true many, many times by now. But we are where we are. There's not much walking it back at this point. Now, let's see. So that brings us to Iranian retaliation. The Iranians, in retaliation to this escalation in the past week by Israel and the United States, have retaliated in kind. So Iranian strikes have increasingly focused on infrastructure-related targets, especially in Israel, which has come under particularly heavy attack over the past week. So these include petrochemical targets, as well as just general industrial facilities. I've also noted that the Iranians have started using more ballistic missiles in the past week that have cluster bomb warheads, which I thought was pretty interesting. Basically, instead of firing missiles with just one warhead, they'll have multiple smaller warheads that will break apart on re-entry, which makes it much harder to intercept them. I had read that they had these and had been holding them in reserve for later, apparently in the hope that they could wear down Israeli and American defenses. And then when they were weakened later in the conflict, they could bring these out. Well, apparently they feel confident that now is the time, because now they're breaking them out. And they are having some effect. There has been some talk in Israel about why they seem to be intercepting fewer of these ballistic missiles. And this seems to be why. They don't really have defenses that are designed for this. Let's see. Kuwaiti oil tanker was hit in port in Kuwait. So, even if Iran can't necessarily hit targets in the Strait of Hormuz, they can right now, but hypothetically in the future, if they can't, they can still hit targets in the broader region, in the broader Persian Gulf. And that'll still be enough. That'll be enough itself to throttle the traffic through the strait. Let's see. And the Iranian government announced that it would respond to any assassination by targeting US linked companies. And they also advised employees of these companies to leave their workplaces and move at least 1 kilometer away from their workplaces to ensure their safety. Specific companies included Cisco, HP, Intel, Oracle, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Meta, IBM, Dell, NVIDIA, JP Morgan Chase, Tesla, General Electric, Boeing, and quote unquote others. And then there was we actually talked about this last week. There was a foiled bomb plot in Paris targeting a Bank of America office. And the French government has come out in the past week and said that the attempted attack, was linked to a pro-Iranian group known as Harakat al-Ashab al-Yamin al-Islamiyah. I haven't heard any updates on that since then, but apparently there is some kind of group operating in France that is trying to commit at least arson. Well, not arson, it's a bomb, so some variety of terrorist attack. Not sure if they arrested all of them, but they did arrest the ones involved in the bomb attempt at the Bank of America office. There had been a lot of talk before the conflict about sleeper cells that the Iranians had supposedly set up, and that they had networks that could be activated to commit acts of terrorism in retaliation to aggression against Iran. Given that we're more than a month into the conflict now, all of that looks pretty oversold. It doesn't seem like they have some vast terrorist network that they can activate. I imagine if they did, they would have activated it by now.
Mm-hmm.
But they do at least have these guys in Paris, apparently, for what little that's worth.
Good catch, Paris police, or whoever did it.
Okay, so the diplomacy section. This is going to be the longest one. Okay, Europe. So over the past week, Trump has been muling and mulling, so to speak, about leaving NATO because of the alleged lack of support he's received from allies vis-a-vis Iran. He also made a threat about Ukraine, saying that he was thinking about stopping the supply and sale of American weapons to Europe that were intended to be transferred on to Ukraine as aid. And this is apparently a threat that is being used to try to encourage Europe to help. You know, the idea being that if Europe doesn't help with the Strait of Hormuz, then he may cut off Ukraine here. In France, there were some statements from the president, Emmanuel Macron. He stated very publicly that the Strait of Hormuz must be reopened through diplomacy, not military action, and that any military operation to quote-unquote liberate the Strait of Hormuz would be unrealistic. So very explicitly challenging the Trump administration on the feasibility even of a military solution to the strait being closed. I also found an article noting that a French-owned ship had actually successfully passed through the Strait of Hormuz. This was relatively recent too, so it wasn't something that happened early on. Technically, it's actually a Malta-flagged container ship owned by a French company, but tomato, tomato. It's notably the first ship owned by a major Western European firm to successfully traverse the strait since the conflict began, which is why I bring it up. So there's some question about how and why they managed to do this, given that the strait is technically closed. Iran has allowed some ships through, generally that were given special permission and that were not owned by countries that had sanctioned Iran. So it's not clear that France really qualifies in that regard. So there's some question as to whether the ship just ran the gauntlet and managed to get away with it. I did read a note that it had traveled unusually close to the coast of Oman. So it may well be that they just ran it. But it could also be that they had permission from Iran, or that the French government negotiated their passage with the Iranian government. None of that is clear from what I've read. let's see, the British government. Oh, the British government was criticized by Secretary of Defense Hegseth, who actually just mocked them, basically mocking them for not helping with the Strait of Hormuz. Let's see, the specific quote is that there's supposed to be a big bad Royal Navy, and the British government basically just let it slide and ignored it. Directly insulted and just not responding to it because it's not worth the effort. So let's see some statements from some GCC countries. The Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council itself stated that the region would take all necessary measures to protect their sovereignty and would not be drawn into the war. So that statement contrasts with recent statements from diplomats from individual members of the GCC, stating that even if they'd been reluctant and had reservations about the conflict before it started, now that the conflict has started and they're suffering from it, they want to see the conflict through, so they can actually see some benefits here. But this recent statement from the GCC Secretary of General kind of belies that and kind of signals that they're not really ready to escalate their involvement in the conflict. So they're backing the United States for the moment, but they don't necessarily want to get more directly involved than they already are. That's my reading.
Getting involved is dangerous and expensive.
Yeah, and Iran could retaliate more than it has against them. So they may be looking to try to avert some damage there. The GCC message here actually makes more sense when you think about it in terms of Trump's stated threat to walk away from the conflict and leave Iran in control of the Strait of Hormuz. That would be bad for the United States. Like I said earlier, that's why I don't think it's a credible threat on the part of the Trump administration. But that scenario would actually be even worse for the GCC. That would very much leave them at the mercy of the Iranian government. The Iranians could pretty much just turn on or off the tap of oil exports or liquid natural gas exports for GCC nations pretty much at will, if they did just formally get control of the strait, like they're talking about. So that would put the GCC nations in an objectively inferior strategic position compared to that which they had before the conflict started, which they are very, very eager to avoid, I would imagine. So I think some of the signaling here is to that effect. They want to pretend to be hawkish here so that they can get Trump on side and try to encourage him not to just walk away and leave them in the lurch.
I see.
Oh, so the Emiratis also said that they're going to double down on the alliance with the U.S.
I see.
So mixed signals, but I think the hawkish signals are the ones that are designed for Trump specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are going to definitely please his ego.
See, I was reading today. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's the strat of getting in the good graces.
Yeah, lots of countries have homed in on that as the way to deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was reading a Middle Eastern regional media outlet today, and they actually made the argument that Qatar and Oman are preferring the path of de-escalation and neutrality. So the Emiratis and the Saudis, and to a lesser degree the Bahrainis and Kuwaitis, are kind of being more hawkish here. They're kind of leaning into the conflict, and the U.S. in particular. Qatar and Oman are apparently not doing that, which I thought was pretty interesting, given that Qatar in particular has been hit. But that hasn't been enough to get them to want to escalate, apparently. So some forbearance there in terms of the Qatari government's foreign policy. I'm less surprised with Oman. Oman has always tried to kind of take the middle path in the region and try to be more of a mediator. So basically, if the GCC nations do decide to escalate, it may not actually involve Qatar or Oman. It may actually just be the four countries I mentioned earlier. Jordan released a statement, which I thought was interesting. Their parliament speaker called for a post-war joint defense and economic treaty encompassing the Arab world to defend against Iran. He also went on to argue that the Iranian government is considering reviving the Persian Empire and wants to incite Shiites across the Arab world. Neither of which I think is actually true, but I think it is true that there is interest in the region in some kind of collective defense institution, some kind of new alliance. This isn't really new. This is actually sort of part of the Abraham Accords. There have been a lot of talk about the Abraham Accords ultimately ending up in a new alliance for the region that would involve not just the Arab states in the region, but also the United States and Israel. So this seems to be a restatement and reaffirmation of the Jordanian government's investment in that outcome. But you could interpret that as sort of renewed enthusiasm in the wake of Iranian, well, I don't want to say Iranian aggression, they're not the ones that started this one, but renewed concern about the power of the Iranian government to project force in the region, let's put it like that. Let's see, the Omani government is apparently drafting a protocol with the Iranian government to monitor traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. That apparently came from the Omani foreign minister. So this is kind of a weird one. I'm not sure how to interpret this. Obviously, the Iranians, if they want to control the strait more thoroughly, are going to want to improve their ability to monitor traffic. I'm not really sure why the Omani government wants to help with that, or if that's even really part of the agreement that they're negotiating. The Omanis, like I said, prefer to be neutral, and I'm sure they have pre-existing agreements with the Iranian government about handling traffic through the strait. But I'm not sure if this is part and parcel of that, or if this is some kind of effort by the Omanis to placate the Iranian government in order to avoid aggression. It could also be that the Omani government is just humoring them here. This could be just more of a technical agreement and not necessarily a signal that the Omanis are giving concessions. But I thought it was notable. It's worth mentioning because this could come up again later, depending on what the Omanis are doing here.
Excuse me.
So over in Iraq, there were some airstrikes targeting a border crossing on the Iranian side. Apparently, some of the popular mobilization militiamen in Iraq have been moving over into Iran. From what I read, they were being deployed to Basij militia bases. The Basij militia is the Iranian government's sort of rank-and-file grassroots shock troops. These are guys who are invested in the government but don't necessarily work directly with the government. They're generally the guys that go out and bust heads when there's protests against the government. So apparently some of Iran's Iraqi proxies have been moving into Iran to provide support, and they've been targeted by airstrikes now. Let's see, over in Lebanon, which we haven't talked about as much, Hezbollah started rocketing Israel in retaliation for the conflict with Iran. The Israeli government has never really stopped bombing them, even after the ceasefire that they agreed last year, but now they're bombing them even harder, apparently. And more specifically, they're attacking targets beyond just southern Lebanon, which is more where they've been focusing. They've also hit some Hezbollah-related targets in the suburbs of Beirut, which is more in the northern part of the country. They've also launched a ground incursion even further into southern Lebanon, since they've never technically retreated from the bit they took earlier. And they're saying that they may maintain a long-term presence in southern Lebanon going forward. And they're apparently serious about that because they've actually destroyed a whole bunch of villages and houses in the area that they've occupied. Apparently they do not want people coming back, and they want to maintain this area as a buffer zone. So obviously the Lebanese government isn't thrilled about that. They're not thrilled about Hezbollah either, which is sort of a giant paramilitary organization that the government can't control. So the Lebanese state is kind of looking very dysfunctional here. They are very much not in control of events on the ground in their own country in any way, shape, or form. Let's see, and China. I thought this was an interesting bit of argumentation. China may actually come out of this empowered, maybe not significantly so, but in a relatively stronger position. And the reasoning has to do with the depletion of American munitions. The idea here is that a lot of missiles and other munitions require a lot of rare earth materials, and China has cornered the market on a lot of those. So in so much as the United States is going to be seriously pressed to restore its inventory of weapons, China may then correspondingly find it has even more leverage with regard to its monopolization of rare earths than it did before, since now the US is in even more of a demanding position, even in an even more difficult position, I should say, in that they need to import a whole bunch of rare earths to restore and replenish munitions, but are not going to be able to do it basically without China's permission. Okay, that's the diplomacy section. And then I just had miscellaneous items here as well. We already talked about, oh no, we didn't talk about this. So I think 2 weeks ago, an F-35 may have been hit over Iran. And we don't really have details as to how yet. Very curious how it happened. The F-35 did make it back to its base. You know, the pilot survived, the aircraft was recovered, etc. But it does seem to have been hit by something. And there's one YouTuber who does aviation stuff that I occasionally watch who had an interesting theory. Apparently, Iran does have a kind of loitering air-to-air missile that they've developed. And it's possible that may have been what did the damage. I've heard of loitering missiles that are designed to hit ground targets. Generally, you fire them, they loiter for some period of time, and then you program them to hit a target after the fact, or pre-program some kind of targeting criteria that will allow the missile to target autonomously. But I've never heard of a loitering missile that's designed to hit a target in the air. That's a new one on me. But apparently that is a thing, and it's possible that's what hit the F-35. It's conceivable because all you really have to do is know where the enemy aircraft are traveling. And given how many sorties are being done, the Iranians probably have a pretty good idea of what vectors American and Israeli aircraft are using on the regular. So if you know the highway that they're using, so to speak, you can just put some of these loitering munitions in their path and hope that they hit something. I don't know how many of these they have or how much they've been using them. And this is just a theory, it's just speculation, but I thought it was interesting, so I wanted to bring it up. Let's see, have you heard about the air base in Louisiana getting droned?
No.
Yeah, so there's an air base in Louisiana called Barksdale Air Base. And apparently some of their operations have been inhibited recently because of drone swarms that have descended on the base and interrupted some of the flights in and out of the base. Some of which included B-52s, apparently. So nobody seems to know why that's happening, and the airbase doesn't seem able to stop it. I thought that was pretty interesting. This has actually happened multiple times now across multiple days. And the airbase seems to be at pains to really substantively do anything. So make of that what you will. It's not the military. So it could be a non-state actor. It could be another branch of the government. Could be the Iranians. We don't really know. But it is happening at a very inopportune time, given that the airbase is being heavily utilized as part of the ongoing operations against
saying
Iran.
it, dude. War Eagles. Eagles have taken out drones. Send the War Eagles to defend against the drones.
Well, given the apparent lack of defenses on the base, that may be what they have to resort to.
Yeah.
Yeah, very weird story, and I'm not sure what to make of it, but I haven't heard any confirmation that much has changed there, so maybe put a pin in that. We may be returning to that later. Let's see here. The U.S. deployed sea drones for the first time. So apparently they're being used for routine patrols as part of operations against Iran. I'm not sure what they're being used for. I would be more interested in undersea drones. I think those are probably more threatening to the U.S. Navy, but they do have at least regular sea drones that can be used as regular speedboats.
Oh, so these aren't like looking for mines and stuff.
Doesn't seem to be the case. Or if they are, they're not talking about it. I have in my notes here that they can be used for surveillance or kamikaze strikes, so given that the Iranian Navy has effectively been destroyed, I imagine that surveillance may be a useful role. Excuse me. Let's see. There may be an incentive. Well, obviously, there's an incentive for the Iranians to push for a nuclear weapon now, but an unintended consequence of the conflict may be that those political actors within Iran who most wanted to push for a nuclear weapon may have inadvertently been empowered here. Because the Ayatollah and some of the other establishment figures in the pre-war administration seemed to have strategized that the best course of action was actually not to rush to a bomb, but rather to maintain a status as a threshold state. That is to say, to build the capacity to build nuclear weapons, but not to fully develop and build any in the short term. Basically, to just sit it right at the precipice and use the possibility that you might get one as a threat to deter aggression. That strategy has obviously failed, and the new leadership in Iran is of a more hawkish nationalistic variety, mostly that being of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. And being more hawkish, they may well think it's in their interest to rush to a nuclear weapon as quickly as possible. Given how inhibited their nuclear program has been because of airstrikes over the past 2 years, that's not as feasible as it was, say, 2 years ago. But that doesn't mean they won't make an effort anyway. So keep your eye on that. There's some bizarre bullshit about Trump talking about a gift. This was from 2 weeks ago. He made some comments about receiving a gift from Iran. The quote here is, "They gave us a present, and the present arrived today. I'm not going to tell you what that present is, but it was a very significant prize," unquote. He was pressed for more detail on this because that's very cagey, and apparently it was, quote, oil and gas related, unquote, but he refused to elaborate further. He did say, quote, "It was a nice thing they did, but what it showed me is that we're dealing with the right people," unquote. Still have no idea what the fuck he's talking about. It's been 2 weeks now, thereabouts, and no elaboration on this. My best guess, from what I read, is that Iran allowed some ships through the strait, and maybe he accredited that to some kind of signaling on their part that they were interested in negotiations, or maybe some kind of good faith signal that they were interested in negotiations. Regardless, nothing seems to have actually come of it. Let's see, more on politics. The Trump administration is kind of, sort of, refusing to call the conflict a war, preferring, quote, military operation, unquote, which has hilarious parallels with Russia's special military operation, and the logic is pretty much the same. They're trying to avoid, basically, the legal ramifications of actually going to war here. But I say more or less not calling it a war, because actually several administration figures have called it a war at one point or another, including Trump himself. I think in one case I heard a guy call it a war and then walk that back and say, well, actually, I think I'm not supposed to call it a war. So inconsistent messaging, again, another consistent trait of the Trump administration across time. They're not very good at this. And then I had another note here about the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act is not going to save us here. Nominally, it's supposed to, but there's a couple things to keep in mind about the War Powers Act. One, it is technically the law, but there has never been any U.S. president since it was passed that has recognized it as constitutional. None of them, though, have actually overtly challenged it. They have all technically observed the requirements of the law, but they have always insisted that they do not have to. So basically, observing that law is a presidential norm. It is not something that they necessarily have to do. So that very easily could, in the event that norm is breached, go before the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court could hypothetically strike it down. It's just never happened up until now. Well, it hasn't happened at all. But the Trump administration has broken many, many norms over the course of its existence. So this could well be one of them. The War Powers Act could be triggered, and they could be required to explain themselves or otherwise cease operations, and they could just fully ignore it. And then it would go before the courts, and then it would take like a year before it reached the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court could rush it if they wanted, but even then it'll probably take months. So that's not a real barrier to presidential overreach, unfortunately. So don't count on that to end the conflict. Now let's see some of the rhetoric coming out of the administration about basically in support of the conflict. One, short-term pain, long-term gain. They're arguing that whatever disruptions the war causes is an acceptable price to pay in exchange for the long-term benefits of whatever the fuck they're doing. Again, they've not really elaborated that to any great extent. But they say that whatever it is they're doing is worth the short-term disruption. So that's one of the rationalizations they've used. Let's see, some other rhetoric they've used is to argue that questions about why the war is happening, let's see, followed by assertion that now that it started, it's necessary to win it. Yeah, this is some people I've seen, this is an argument I've seen online on social media. There's a lot of people that are skeptical about the war, especially people that voted for him because they didn't want any new wars, especially in the Middle East. But I've seen some of them argue now that since the war is now on, it needs to be won, even if the start of it is not necessarily justified. Terrible logic, sets a terrible precedent politically, and is just generally bad politics. But this is an argument, this is a line of argumentation I've seen, generally from some of the more tribal-minded nationalists in the United States. And then the final note here I had in the Iran update is that Paul Krugman is crashing out on YouTube.
How so?
He's been posting more and more dramatic YouTube videos. I think a couple days ago it was that he was worried. You know, basically he's kind of been down on the whole Iran conflict from the start. But after today's Trump posts on Truth Social, he was particularly dramatic, you know, basically saying that his version of America is over and that the United States could begin targeting just outright civilian targets in Iran in the coming days. I think the deadline is supposed to be Tuesday. So we'll see if Trump extends the deadline or if he actually does significantly escalate airstrikes on civilian targets of one kind or another within Iran. But Paul Krugman is especially upset about it, basically. And he seems to be one of a growing number of analysts of one kind or another who are of that mind, which is a little disconcerting. But that's it for the Iran update for today.
Thank you for doing so.
Did we have any questions for today?
I think we did.
I'll take a look here. if I can find it. Sometimes I lose track of it. There it is. Okay. Do you think it's more likely that the U.S. will have to devote a ground campaign to taking the Strait, or that pressure negotiations will eventually win out? Yeah, that's kind of the million-dollar question right now. Nobody really knows. Washington does seem to be preparing for a ground incursion, but the extent to which they're doing that, the extent to which that's a credible threat and that they actually want to go through with it, is a little unclear. I could totally envision limited ground operations, but it would come with a big cost. And I'm not sure the Trump administration has the stomach for that. So I kind of suspect that eventually, after another, let's say, a month or so, or maybe even more potentially, that eventually there will be some kind of negotiated settlement. I don't think the Trump administration will be happy with the outcome, but I also don't think that they really want a prolonged conflict. It's not really in their benefit. And I think the Iranians, for their part, even if they say that they want to go the distance here and basically force the Trump administration into concessions, significant concessions, I think they're going to recognize that the US government isn't going to do that. They're not going to evacuate from the region. They're not going to leave their bases, etc. So I think what Iran really wants to do, at bare minimum, is to drag the war out to exact a cost so that there will be deterrent for a future strike. They want to set this as a precedent for what happens when the United States and Israel fuck with them. But I don't think they want like a permanent conflict here either. Now that's speculation on my part. It could be they really do want to go the distance here and go for maximalist objectives. But as much disruption as they're causing to the global economy by closing the strait, the campaign of aerial bombardment is going to have an effect too. They are getting hurt. They are successfully waging an asymmetrical conflict, but they are taking their fair share of the pain here. I think I said on the first week that their strategy would be to stop the punches with their face, Rocky Balboa style, until the other guy got tired. That's basically what's happening. But when you do that, you are getting punched in the face. You do want it to stop at some point. So I think that'll be the impetus for them to negotiate. I don't know if we'll return to the status quo ante entirely. I imagine there will be some concessions, probably more so by Iran. But the United States may find it has to make some too. So we'll see. It's all very unclear right now. But I don't think a ground campaign is necessary for that to happen. I think it could improve U.S. leverage a little bit. But again, I think the Trump administration is going to be relatively gun-shy there, since the cost and casualties, if not also the financial cost, is going to be relatively high compared to the operations we've seen thus far. As much as we talk about it as being a war, it's still only aerial in nature. This is being fought exclusively, from what I've seen thus far, from the air, both by the US, Israel, and the Iranians. So a ground component would dramatically change the tone of the conflict, so to speak, the nature of the conflict. Doesn't mean it won't happen, but I think a negotiated settlement is more likely as a vector for an ultimate resolution. Let's see, this was a random source I watched online, but the senators that actually supported the war against Iran even before Trump declared it was Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham. Is it possible that, along with Netanyahu, that those two aim to convince Trump to go to war with Iran as well? Absolutely. That's not new, though. That's not something that they've just started doing and that directly contributed to the conflict starting just in the past couple months. They've been trying to convince multiple presidents to do that for decades. It's not new. Lindsey Graham has always been a hawk on Iran. I'm not as familiar with Ted Cruz. I think he has a record there, but certainly Netanyahu has an established record to that effect. So yeah, they've been trying to convince him to do that. But the fact that they've always been trying to do that means that it's a constant variable. So it's a contributing factor, but a constant variable isn't enough to explain why things suddenly change. There's got to be something else there. So I think it's relevant, but it wasn't the decisive factor. There's some other element there. I'm guessing it was Trump himself, most likely. He seems to have been, I don't know if the word excited is the right word, but he seems to have been encouraged by the success of the Venezuela operation, and he may be riding that high. He may have ridden it right into the right into the Iran operation. He supposedly did tell aides that he thought that the Iranian government would capitulate in the early days of an assault, and that they didn't have to worry about the Strait of Hormuz closing for that reason. So that kind of logic.
So similar to what Russia said with Ukraine.
Oh yeah, it's exactly.
They're just going
the
to
same.
cave like in a couple days. It's not going to be a big deal. It's not going to be very expensive. But what happens if they don't give up in 2 days?
Yeah. Yeah, kick the door in and the whole rotten structure will collapse. To quote another dumbass leader, starting a dumbass war. Yeah, let's see. Is it so? Yeah, that's. I don't think that's why he started it, but yeah, they have been trying to convince him. Let's see. Are a nation's institutions a product of its culture, or is the culture a product of institutions acting over long periods? These are not mutually exclusive. Both of these are true. Culture influences pretty much everything we do to varying degrees and at varying levels, but institutions that develop locally and organically, endogenously, to use an academic term, yeah, culture does play a role in the emergence of those kinds of institutions. But in turn, those institutions, as they establish themselves and become entities in their own right, do have a knock-on cultural effect. They play a role in perpetuating this, that, or the other culture of one kind. Maybe it's academic culture in the case of universities, military culture in cases of the military, et cetera. So, it's not a chicken and egg question. It's more of an Ouroboros. It's both of them feeding into each other constantly. Culture feeding into institutions, and then institutions feeding into culture. And long periods is correct. It is something that plays out over long periods of time. It's not generally something that happens, in a short period. Institutions need time to establish themselves as fixtures. Institutions that are set up but then disappear after a few years, those never really have the credibility to make big changes generally. So, but once they have legs, and I'm talking like big institutions again, like universities, governments, states, corporations, etc. I'm using the term very broadly here. Institutions need to have staying power, to have credibility, and they need credibility in order to make long-term impacts. So long-time horizons is definitely the way to kind of look at them and their impact. Have you tried Carnation Breakfast Essentials? It's tasty and nutritious. I have no idea what that is.
Is this an ad? Have you tried Carnation Breakfast Essentials? It's really good and has the nutrients your body needs. It's an Agent Smith question.
I think I've seen these before, but I don't think I've ever had them.
Commercials or just breakfast?
No, the breakfast essential thing. It's like a drink. I don't know, if somebody recommends it or if it has some kind of health benefit, I'll try it.
It's a fucking meal replacement, says the chat.
A what?
A meal replacement.
Oh, really?
It's used for people grieving or elderly that need calorie replacement. What the fuck? That's funny.
Oh, maybe I should try that. Now, let's see. There was a question from last time. I think I did answer the Disco Elysium question, didn't I?
Which ending did you get? Yes, you did.
Yeah.
You tried to answer without spoilering.
Which was a little difficult. I tried anyway. A shout out and a thank you to the mods for handling questions. You guys kind of have done that for almost a decade now. So thank you so much for all the work you put in over that time frame.
Heck yeah. Fuzzy Cord, how long have you been doing questions ish? Because we've had a few other mods also pitch in and do the questions for episodes.
I've certainly noted Fuzzy Cord many, many times doing it. So thanks to Fuzzy Cord for going to the trouble. And
Thank
also
you.
to everybody else. It's a team effort. How are we doing on time?
Been going for hour 35. There's a question. Do you think Agent Smith would be open to being commissioned to do some research with an hourly rate or something?
I can hardly say no to money. So, I guess I could. I am kind of a dysfunctional adult living in my mom's basement. So I don't know if it's necessarily the best use of whoever's money would be going towards it. But
The internet's the internet.
It.
You can log on from whatever location.
True. And I'm like, it's 2026, so I'm like 12, 13 years removed from doing regular academic work. That was the last time, that was when I was last in the PhD program.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried to kind of keep tabs on it since, tried to do analysis, some deep reading, but it's hard to do it as intensively on your own as when you're like in an actual program, doing actual work academically. Yeah. There's a lot of pressure in a program like that, so you really just have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm more than a little bit rusty by now.
Would your email be a good contact for you if someone wanted to commission stuff?
Yeah, just use the John Smith email. That's what they want to do.
Cool. Yeah, because that was a topic that came up quite a few years ago now, but the emergence of the gig economy in the U.S., in a sense, that's what I do as well. You are creating a service that other people can pay for on an individual basis. It's not really like a long-term commitment. They would be commissioning some of your hours to look up stuff, and then you give them some kind of result. And whether they give you business again determines if that was good or not, or if they're satisfied. So, yeah. Get that bread, brother.
Oh, yeah, Fuzzy Cord was asking. We did get the middle two questions.
Can you bet on Agent Smith's age? You can guess, I suppose.
I'm old. I'm middle-aged or approaching middle-aged, depending on how you want to define it.
Sir Ian McKellen is old.
Who?
Sir Ian McKellen. Gandalf.
Oh. Yeah, he's up there, isn't he?
Yep.
Not old enough not to be in the next Marvel movie, apparently.
People have guessed your age as being 69, 38, 36, and 45 so far.
That's pretty accurate, actually. Pretty good ballpark answers. Pretty ballpark guesses, rather. Yeah, it's definitely late 30s, early 40s. What would you call me? I guess elder millennial, I think is the term I've heard used before.
Mm-hmm.
A zennial.
You were the same year as Kukyo, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Because I met him through musical theater, actually. So that was one that wasn't really dependent on what year you got to that university. It was just like, if you're in the theater troupe, you're in the theater troupe, and we were both in the bass section. Most of my friends would have been the same year age as me in college, just because we arrived at the same time, we're in the same classes. And a lot of us came from a math and science program in Denton beforehand, and we all kind of stayed friends and so on. And a lot of us shared apartments. Yeah, I know Agent Smith through another guy, Kukyo, who was very much like a multi-talented person between nerdy tech stuff and the arts and philosophy and just conversation. So definitely a multi-talented person. And just by virtue of Agent Smith being a friend, I don't know if it was through the vampire game that I heard of you guys, but that was definitely a friend group y'all had.
The vampire. Oh, that's right. They were doing that role playing thing. Yeah, I was never part of that, but I did hear about it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm still in contact with a lot of those guys. A lot of the guys in that circle. I think you only met at the memorial when we were at that British. What was it?
No, I think I'd been over to that house before a few
Oh, had
times.
you?
Yeah, I think I remember meeting
Okay.
them a few times.
Yeah, some of those guys I've actually known since elementary school.
Hmm.
Been friends a long time.
Vampire the Masquerade? No, they were actual vampires, like full on teeth modifications. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, Vampire the Masquerade. That's correct.
Wait, was that it? I thought they were doing tabletop role play.
Is that not the same thing?
Well, there's a game called Vampire Masquerade.
Hmm.
So I thought that was just a computer game. I didn't think there was like a tabletop equivalent.
Oh, I think the game was made later, but I'm not sure. I
Oh, is
never
that what it
played it,
was?
but I heard
Okay.
about it. It's pretty cool. It's like a role playing game that has different types of vampires, different types of abilities and stuff. It's a tabletop first, chat saying. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know. Okay, thank you. I've heard good things about it. Well, the
Mm-hmm.
game anyway, not the tabletop game. I've never heard of that, but yeah, the computer game I've heard referenced as a kind of cult classic.
Mm-hmm.
That people played it for like decades, even after it kind of obsolesced.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people love it.
You know, one thing that you made me think of with regards to being in a program and just being in university in general is you feel like you're not only being enriched with the knowledge of your degree that you're going for, but your friends are oftentimes specking into different stuff. So if you continue to hang out and you have just conversations about what you're learning, the knowledge gain is super massive because it's not just your specialization, it's your friends as well. Because you and I would have taken very different classes. Kukia would have taken very different classes, and a lot of other people in the group, same kind of deal. We had an engineer spec person, we had a computer science spec person. There was a genetics spec friend of mine who corrected me on a mistake that I was propagating. I was saying I
Hmm.
was in my lifespan development course in psychology, and my professor said there's no correlation between IQ. It's not hereditary. There's no correlation between parents and children. And I was like, wow, none at all? That's crazy. Like your kid's intelligence is basically totally random. And I just walked out of class and I was like, professor said so. So I believe that. And I told my friend, and I was like, hey, did you know IQ is not heritable at all? And he was like, what? It's like a 0.65 or something. Like he gave me a number. And I was like, oh, like there's a ratio that can be measured. Shit, he just gave us bad information. And that was really important for me because you give authority figures a lot of leeway to just say stuff and you just believe them because they have studied and they probably do know a lot of stuff that you don't. But anything that they say at a given moment, it could be true or not. And that was a fairly innocent one that like it didn't uh, hit my personal beliefs in a way that I wanted a certain answer over another. It was just something that I was curious about. And within the same university, we got different answers, and they could not both be correct.
Yeah. And that's one of the good things about the university experience. You do get those kinds of experiences where you're challenged, corrected, etc.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of critics of university life don't really seem to get that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole other conversation. Oh. Well, did you want to hear about Cuba?
Sure. How's Cuba doing?
Bad. Yeah, the oil embargo is definitely having an effect. They did get some oil from that Russian tanker that docked last week, but I don't know if that augurs a regular resupply from Russia or what the deal is with that. So we'll
Mm.
see. But I think it's worth talking about two items here. One, Cuba did release 2,000 political prisoners. It's the second time this year they've done that. The last time was in March, when 51 were set free after talks with the Vatican. Let's see, there was also another case where they did it in 2025, where they released 553 people in a deal brokered by both the Vatican and the US. So I'm not sure why they released the 2000 recently. This could have to do with alleged talks that are happening between the Cuban and US governments. The other item here is the impact of the oil embargo. So I took some notes on this, just a couple items illustrating the impact that it's having on the economy. For one, garbage is piling up. Basically, the garbage trucks just don't have fuel, and so they haven't been able to make their rounds. In hospitals, there's some additional deaths that are happening on account of hospital generators starting to fail. Power failures broadly. Apparently, the city of Havana just went dark after there was a couple of incidences of the power grid completely failing. And there's potential for a cholera outbreak on account of just deterioration in conditions. So this is the pressure that the Cuban government is facing right now.
Okay.
Supposedly they are talking with the Trump administration, but God knows what they're talking about. I've tried to poke around for some analysis about just what it is the Trump admin wants out of Cuba. One guy who was probably the most articulate author of those that I read recently argued that he basically just wants Cuba to open up its economy, and that he might be okay with something like the Cuban government as it is now staying on, basically authoritarian, but maybe not necessarily explicitly communist. I'm not sure how the logic runs there. But basically, he may just be demanding Cuba open the economy. And that would be a very weird thing to add. You would think it would be the other way around. Cuba doesn't have any big natural resources for the United States to invest in. Maybe there's lots of prime real estate to invest in. Maybe Trump himself wants to invest in that. But Cuba is not like some wellspring of strategic assets, at least not natural resources. So I'm not really sure what the benefit would be, broadly speaking, in that case. Certainly Marco Rubio is more interested in changing the government to make it less authoritarian, at least not communist. And I would think that maybe he would be willing to accept the economy being relatively closed and still run in a command fashion if it meant that the government would become less authoritarian, more humanitarian, and more democratic. Although I may be assigning too much to his motives in that sense. But yeah, it should not be the case that opening Cuba's economy should be a priority. Like, the priority for successive U.S. governments has always been the humanitarian situation, democratization. Just opening the economy and allowing the authoritarian government to stay on in exchange for a normalization of relations, that only really makes sense in the case of something like oil, where you get some kind of strategic asset, more access to a strategic asset. Although even in that case, the logic is kind of weak, like with Venezuela. But that logic doesn't apply with Cuba. Like, we don't need more sugar. Like, that's not a strategic asset. So what's the point? It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. The only logic that really makes sense, given what I know right now, is that he just wants to do it for legacy reasons. He's kind of an old man. He wants to do something that'll leave a mark. Cuba's been a thorn in the side of the U.S. for generations now. So maybe he just wants to go down in history as the guy that changed the Cuban government.
How has it been a thorn? Because I haven't felt any pain from Cuba.
Yeah, that's another point of criticism. Like, even if Cuba is hostile to the United States, it has been successfully deterred from hosting military bases for other foreign hostile powers. It has projected some influence into the surrounding region, but it's never been able to do anything significant with it. So, yeah, it's not really a threat to the United States. It's not something that it's not some dire threat that requires addressing in the short to medium term. We could totally carry on as before, and it would not be a big deal for the national security of the United States. But Cuba does nominally host surveillance stations, spy stations for Russia and China. They do have a strategic relationship with those countries. So it could be that there's a sense that they want not only for the economy to maybe open, or for maybe the politics to open to some degree, it may be that they make foreign policy demands on the Cuban government for them to change their alignment and to stop cooperating strategically with Moscow and Beijing. But again, that would not be a big achievement, especially if it means that both the Cuban economy and the Cuban government remain as they have been. So it just feels like theater, but in this case, it doesn't seem as much like theater, because theater is normally supposed to be sexy and get the public excited about something. Mm-hmm. It's only a very small slice of the US population that's going to give a shit about this. And a lot of them will be disappointed if he leaves the Communist Party in charge, which honestly I think is probably pretty likely. So yeah, legacy is the explanation that makes the most sense right now. That could change. We'll see what objectives they have later on. And it could be those objectives actually change over time. There's certainly precedent for that. But we'll see. Everything is very much in flux. He has stated multiple times that Cuba is next, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. So we will likely be revisiting this at some point.
That just made me think of Boris Johnson. I'll be back.
Yeah, it's looking less and less likely, and more likely that Nigel Farage will become PM. We'll see what that looks like. Probably stupid would be my guess, given the track record of other populist governments. We'll see.
How's the UK doing, speaking of?
Pretty not okay. I guess is how I would describe it. They're not doing especially good, but they're not doing terrible either. They're just sort of... They've gotten out of the populist spiral and are now back in the pre-populist malaise, which may or may not be an improvement, depending on your perspective. I've yet to see any British government offer any realistic pathway out of the sort of semi-stagnation that Britain has been in for some decades now. So they're basically just there and don't seem well inclined to change. Farage could change that. He'll certainly do some dramatic shit, I don't doubt. Whether or not it'll actually be to the betterment of the nation, to the broader population, that's a lot more dubious. We'll see. Maybe he'll return the UK to economic growth by turning the UK into Europe's sweatshop. Deregulation does seem to be something he really wants to do, so something to look forward to if you're British.
I visited Seattle recently, and there was a big reveal of the next, basically, patch of Warhammer 40k, the tabletop game, and they were saying that it's a company based in the UK, and they have larger business than the whole fishing industry in the UK.
Really?
Yeah. The Plastic Mans.
They are very expensive, especially if you really get into it. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons I never got into Mech Warrior.
Why
just too much money.
Expensive?
Yeah, tabletop miniatures. Oh. Yeah, all of that shit adds up real quick.
Huh. I didn't know they had a Mech Warrior, one of those.
Oh, fuck yeah. It's been around a long time. That was one of the first, I think. Very cool franchise.
Yeah, I
I don't
liked
know if you've
MechWarrior on the
ever.
computer a lot.
Sorry, what?
I liked MechWarrior on the computer a lot.
Yeah, that's the most well known of their media entries outside of the tabletop gaming. But they've also had a couple other. They've had a couple strategy games, and they've actually all been really good. I don't know if anybody remembers Mech Commander back in the 90s, but that was a lot of fun. And then Battletech, I think from 2019, thereabouts. That was another turn based strategy game entry. And that was actually, I think I read that's considered the closest approximation to the actual tabletop gaming experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually have played through Battletech entirely, and that's very good. A lot of fun. Recommend. Oh, before I forget here, I did have a correction from last week. So we had somebody point out, I stated that Georgetown was sort of the prestigious university where America's diplomats were trained. It's most prestigious university for the training of diplomats. And somebody pointed out, it's not actually Georgetown that's the most prestigious. That would actually be Johns Hopkins SAIS. So my apologies. I was misinformed. Okay, well, was there anything you wanted to get to? Maybe a region, a country, what have you?
How is India doing with all this?
They've resumed importing Russian oil. They actually got an exemption to do that, so that didn't take long. They only negotiated the trade deal with the United States, in which they agreed to stop buying Russian oil a few months ago. Let's see. Beyond that, overall, they're doing okay. It kind of depends, though. The total impact will depend on how long the conflict lasts. Because India could be impacted by the disruption to fertilizer. Because they do import a lot of their fertilizer from the Middle East. So that could be a problem for Indian agriculture. But they've still got inventory that'll last several months. And I still think the conflict will probably be over within a month or two. So they should be okay. Knock on wood. We'll see. But I don't think they're super impacted by the other disruptions that have been caused by the conflict. I don't think they buy a lot of aluminum, for example, from the region, or necessarily in general. Helium, don't think that's too big a deal for them. Yeah, probably oil and liquid natural gas would be the main focus for them. And they've got inventories to last them a while. Politically, they're kind of on the outside looking in. Pakistan has actually taken more of a role in mediating in the conflict. India's just sort of sitting by and watching. Not sure what exactly their plan is to deal with it beyond trying to cope with inflationary forces. But for now, they've been pretty quiet. Yeah, I really haven't heard much news out of India recently, come to think of it. Not real sure what they're up to these days.
Yeah, I would think that whole conflict would be kind of on their doorstep, so to speak, but I guess they have a few countries between them.
Oh, yeah. And Pakistan actually has some kind of defense agreement with Saudi Arabia. So they're actually kind of a natural partner, at least as far as mediation. They're more vested, so to speak, in the region than India is.
I think you've said Pakistan is pretty militaristic relative to their economy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the army pretty much runs the country as their own personal fiefdom.
Isn't Egypt kind of like that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the big military junta countries are Pakistan, Egypt, Turkey, Thailand. Although in Turkey's... Oh, yeah, Thailand's had a whole bunch of coups. over the course of its history, and almost all of them have involved the military. Turkey is kind of civilianized a little bit its military, but it's still kind of an open question how loyal the Turkish military would actually be if there came to be some kind of real tension between them and the Erdogan government.
How did Erdogan get to power?
Free elections. Turkey democratized after the end of the Cold War. Erdogan was one of the first guys to win power.
And he's kept power for a long time.
Yeah, he has. Bangladesh has a pretty strong military as far as involvement in civilian affairs, so maybe you could throw them on the list too. But they're much, much less prominent in Bangladeshi society than the Pakistani military is in Pakistani society.
Chat's saying that in Turkey they replaced all the courts. They don't have a fair judicial system.
Well, that's kind of normal behavior for autocrats like Erdogan, so I'm not surprised. But the military itself has a long history of being authoritarian in its own right. So the question of whether the military is still the main power in Turkish politics is kind of open for me. I don't know that Erdogan has fully tamed them yet. I think he might have just reached a concord with them. He actually has an alliance with the leading ultranationalist party in Turkey. I think they're called the MHP. And I imagine they have a fair amount of supporters in the military.
That's kind of similar to Israel, right? Where the leader also has support from the far right.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of similar. Very different types of far right parties, but yeah, same idea. They use them to stay into power and in turn give them disproportionate influence. But in the case of Israel, Netanyahu needs them to maintain a majority. It's very technical. In the case of Erdogan, I don't think it's just about a majority. I think it's also about pacifying the military to try to keep them out of politics. So it's a little bit different. It's more informal in that sense and less technical. More of a gentleman's agreement to keep the military's pets involved in governance and not to just completely exclude them.
I guess in Thailand, then I didn't think of it as being as military driven, but they probably leave the monarchs up as just a symbolic figure. They're not the ones with the actual power.
Yeah, the monarchy is the maintenance and protection of the monarchy is the excuse the Thai military uses to maintain its hold on power. Whenever people get too restive or politicians get too ambitious about normalizing the role of the military in Thai society, then suddenly there's a crisis involving the monarchy and the military needs to take action. Yeah, they've been a lot more egregious about that in the past couple decades. In the Cold War, they kind of had national security reasons to do it. You know, they would accuse protesters and opposition of being sort of fronts, you know, for communists of one kind or another. But since the Cold War ended, they've relied more and more on lèse majesty rationalizations.
What is lèse majesty?
It's Latin, and I don't remember the exact translation, but basically it means that it's a crime to insult the monarch.
Oh.
And the Thai military tends to interpret insult very, very broadly. Purposely so. Yeah, they've leaned especially hard on that with the current generation of dissidents. They've kept trying to disband parties and, you know, jail politicians and whatnot. It's not been enough to really stop the opposition's momentum, but it has kind of hobbled them a little bit. It certainly kept them out of power.
Blitzer is the French word for to wound, I see.
Sorry, what was that?
Blessure is French for to wound.
Really?
Lèse majesté is a legal term referring to an offense, insult, or act of treason against the dignity of a ruling head of state or sovereign power.
Huh. I thought it was Latin. My mistake.
French was the lingua franca, it's why it's called that. They did have the trade and science language for a while. It's moved around. One thing that we forget, especially as Westerners, is that Arabic was very strong in terms of the technological and scientific world for a decent chunk of time. We still use Arabic numerals.
And a lot of ancient Greek writing was actually preserved by the Arabs after it had been lost in Europe and was rediscovered during the Enlightenment.
Do people really forget the Islamic Golden Age? I would say a lot of people don't learn about it because I don't think it's in regular public school curriculum. I think I learned about it in college. So if you went through high school, probably didn't learn too much about it. Bias is pretty strong. Like, we tend to teach children about how awesome we are. I think a lot of countries do that. And they don't talk about other countries in the same awesome light, especially if they're current rivals or enemies. So the Middle East, at the time that I was growing up, there's definitely strife there, and then 9/11 happened when I was in elementary school. So definitely some animosity there. You're less likely to teach the kids about, like, look how awesome the people in this region are if we're actively fighting them. Typically, you want to kind of villainize those that you're sending military stuff at so that people feel on board, even if it's not necessarily the best move. Education is partly propaganda, or I guess it has its bias. It's not always.
Well, a lot of people, too, just don't pay attention in history class. It's not really the favored subject of most people. So even if you teach it to them, they may well forget it a week later.
That's true.
Yeah, I would say the Islamic Golden Age is probably common knowledge in this chat. We've got a smart chat, but I don't think the general population is going to remember it much, if any.
Yeah, chat's pointing out that Erdogan's very tough on the Kurdish minority. We've been talking about the Kurds here for a while. It just seems hard for countries to want to yield space to let a new state exist. It sounds good from the human perspective. I think you said they're the only major ethnic group that doesn't have their own state of some kind.
The largest one.
The largest one. So there are probably smaller ones that also don't have states.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, states give up territory very, very grudgingly. It's not easy to come by, especially in the 21st century. Doesn't change hands much. We're kind of well past the era when you can just buy territory from somebody.
But space.
Space. There's space.
Yeah.
Go build a base on the moon.
We're working on that. Go Artemis program. Yeah, science.
Go to Mars and found New Nevada.
Oh boy. The wind's on Mars. People think the wind is bad here. Mars is like terrible Earth weather all the time. Way too goddamn cold. No trees. We have to do a lot of work on Mars. Moon base is way more feasible to start. I don't think the moon base has as good of resources, and you have to build more of a biodome because it doesn't have an atmosphere.
Yeah. It's going to be expensive. You guys can have Mars. I'll stay here and guard the planet.
Good on you. Earth still has way more stuff. Way more stuff that is distinctly human to enjoy. Going to Mars is like going to some kind of outland where it doesn't have infrastructure or amenities or the same natural beauty. I guess it's got a rugged natural beauty, but Alas.
Yeah, not my cup of tea. Too much rugged, not enough internet.
Rather go to a new solar system? Yeah, but far is expensive and costly for time. So there are probably lots of really gourmet places that we could go that are just far as fuck away. There's nothing we can do to ruin the Earth to make it less hospitable than Mars. That's probably true. Maybe. I think if we nuke the bejesus out of ourselves, we can make it pretty bad.
Yeah, don't underestimate human ingenuity. We're pretty good at fucking shit up.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm excited to see where it goes, though. I like being in the age of space exploration. I think as long as we can direct our desires in a good direction, we could make a whole bunch of progress really fast. Because like if we weren't as fussy about blowing each other up, and we were more fussed about like building moon bases, we would do that really quickly. So I hope that China pulls off a crazy good space stunt as well, because that'll stimulate us to do more space stuff.
I have a spoiler for you.
What?
We are not going to be stop. We are not going to stop being fussy about blowing each other up.
Oh. It's too much of a classic for us at this point.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's pretty well baked in. See, my criticism of the idea of space exploration is that it's not really all that economically feasible. Like, what is the benefit to the cost of doing so?
Propagation of the human species over millennia.
I could see that, but that's really a very, very long-term thing. And it may be that we can't even survive, what would it be, the next ice age, whatever it was? Some random thing I was reading about that. And we may not be able to figure out interstellar travel before that happens. Or maybe at all. It could be that it's just impossible and that we're just stuck in the solar system. I keep reading people say that faster than light travel is not possible. So if that's true, then I don't really see how we could conceivably travel between solar systems. That doesn't seem realistic without FTL travel.
Isn't there like wormhole potential where there are rips in space where space is not perfectly linear? Like it's not just you fly from A to B, there are curves and shortcuts. Is that the case?
Now that's getting well outside of my wheelhouse, but
Any cosmologists?
yeah, I think I do remember. Oh fuck, what was his name? He was the physics guy in the wheelchair. What was his name?
Stephen Hawking.
Stephen Hawking?
Yeah.
Okay, Stephen Hawking. I was afraid I was about to mix him up with Tony Hawk, and I didn't want to embarrass myself.
Tony Hawk! Dude, Tony Hawk could get us there faster than light. He would do a crazy skateboard flip, go through space-time. Whoa, 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 he's there. Tony Hawk, the unexpected science hero.
I could have sworn I remember Stephen Hawking saying that there was no such thing as a wormhole.
Oh, I see.
But maybe he's wrong. Maybe there's some other theory out there, some information. You know, physics and hard science is very much not my subject, unfortunately. I would defer to Chad on that, definitely.
Science fantasy stuff. Yeah, but we're doing a lot of science fantasy stuff now that was on TV back in Star Trek. So if that trend were to continue, then eventually we would be doing cool shit that you might not fully understand. Seems not feasible now, but innovation over time results in breakthroughs that you don't expect.
True. And honestly, I don't want to sound like a complete downer on it. I would fully support further exploration of the solar system. That would be cool, and it could offer unexpected discoveries. And I think it's worth doing, if only for morale reasons. Yeah, I think it would be really cool to... What is it? The Titan moon? I forget which planet it's over, but there's supposed to be a moon that has a lot of nitrogen or some other core ingredient for life on it.
Titan and Europa, I think, are the top candidates for extraterrestrial life in the solar system. Europa could have it underwater, and Titan could have it just with a different composition.
Yeah. So go do that. That would be rad.
Yeah.
I would actually like that much more than going to Mars, actually. Because Mars is just depressing to me. Whenever I see pictures of Mars, it makes me think of rural Nevada,
No.
which is
Yeah.
not a place I want to live in. So do the moons instead, I say, for what little that's worth. Well, did you have any history questions or country questions? Maybe it's just something you wanted to learn more about. I'm just kind of freestyling at the end here. Just to kind of shake things up so we're not talking about all the depressing dumb shit the Trump administration is doing.
Yeah, true. Do you know if Russia is doing anything with their space program? I'm asking space stuff again. Why aren't they motivated to do this too?
Well, I think they are. I mean, they do have a fairly prominent space program, but they just don't have the resources for the big stuff anymore. It's kind of too expensive. They've got other priorities. Mostly I think they focus more on their commercial operations. A lot of people who send commercial cargo up into orbit pay the Russians to do it for them. I think the United States actually did that for a long time. They sent American astronauts up using Russian rockets. They actually did that even during the Ukraine war, the early going.
Oh, I think I remember you mentioning that.
Yeah, it was a little weird. But they are still kicking around. They're not doing like Mars or the moon or anything, as far as I know. I think Japan's space program has been more active. They kind of work pretty closely with NASA on a lot of stuff, but they do have their own satellite launching operations, I think.
Who has the best navies in the world right now? Ranked in order.
You can probably guess.
U.S. number 1.
Yeah. U.S. Navy is easily the first. Beyond that, actually, who would be number 2? Whenever people do these ranking things, it always comes down to weird subjective criteria. So, like, do you prioritize number of ships? Do you prioritize tonnage, experience, capability? All of that stuff kind of plays in, technology as well. I guess the intuitive answer would be China, since they've been investing in it so heavily over the past few decades. Their Navy is very large at this point, but it has virtually no experience. The technology they use is unproven. And they don't really have the expansive network of allies and international bases that the US Navy has, which limits their ability to project power beyond China and Chinese waters. So I think if only...
They would rank it US, UK, India, and Japan. That's Sea of Whiskey's top 4. Some people are mentioning France.
I really wouldn't give the British or French navies too much credit on that, because they've been cash-strapped for a while now. They've had to make a lot of cuts. They do have a carrier battle group, or at least an aircraft carrier, but I don't think they have the resources to really do extensive operations overseas in which they can really leverage that to do much. So yeah, the French and British navies are powerful technologically. They do have a lot of experience. And they do have an alliance with the United States, which counts for something. But just in terms of numbers, they're pretty small now. They made a lot of cuts after the Cold War ended. And I don't know how much funding cuts have impacted their readiness. I'd have to read more about that. So I think their limited size and difficulty projecting power are big knocks against them. I don't think you can really count them as more powerful than China's Navy at this point. whatever problems China's Navy has with technology and experience, they kind of make up for in terms of number of ships and tonnage.
So Zerg.
Basically, quantity does have a quality all of its own.
How are the
And
Korean navies?
I mean, they barely have navies to speak of, really. Yeah, North Korea has a submarine that can launch ballistic missiles, supposedly. So that's a nice capability for them. I imagine the USN is keeping track of it at all times. So if anything ever happened, they would probably sink it immediately. That's assuming it doesn't sink on its own. The North Korean Navy actually had a pretty bad accident a while back, a couple months, maybe last year, in which they lost an attack submarine that they were building. I'm not sure what the details were. South Korea really just doesn't invest much in its Navy. They mostly focus on their army more than anything, for obvious reasons, like North Korea is the main threat. So, they kind of depend on the U.S. Navy to protect their maritime trading routes and whatnot.
South Korea is one of the countries with mandatory military conscription. I was telling Chad at the start of stream today that there was a live stream fail clip of a streamer who's in South Korea, and one of their bits is they're an asshole to people of the local country, and they will just talk shit about them for clicks and drama. And they were talking shit about South Koreans in South Korea, just on the streets of the city, live. And they dared people on Twitter to come and punch them, just trying to be cocky and stuff. And there was this gigantic Korean dude who no doubt had mandatory military experience and just showed up and clocked him. So the people in the comments were all like, why are you talking shit about people who have way above par training in combat? It's a very unsmart move. Yes, that's the correct person, say whiskey.
Yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about, but I'm not going to say his name because he's an asshole.
Yeah.
Clout chasers really don't need their names spoken more than necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah, they fucked him up pretty good. He deserved it. No sympathy from me.
I think people of different countries are awesome and unique, and they all have fought through different challenges that are different from our own. But yeah, I guess if you want to rage bait and get clicks, that's a thing that you have to bear the consequences of.
Huh?
There's Finland and Israel who come to mind that also have some kind of mandatory military conscription. And each country has a reason for it. Like South Korea is kind of at a standoff against North Korea, so they want readiness. And then Finland obviously has a danger neighbor problem that they've dealt with in the past.
True.
And Israel has enemies in every direction. So
Burma's government does it too.
Oh, Burma.
Yeah, they actually significantly expanded it because of the Civil War. Yeah, I'm not sure I can do a full accounting of all of the developing countries, especially in Africa. I'm not sure who among them has it. Eritrea definitely has it. They've got one of the most notorious examples. Mm-hmm. You can serve several decades as part of your mandatory military service there, involuntarily. But yeah, I'm not up to snuff on the rest of them, really. I'd have to look it up. It's probably a full list somewhere. Oh, a handy-dandy graphic. Limited conscription. This is obviously an old map. Known for conscription. So red and yellow. I guess I could just send this to you. For your viewing enjoyment.
This chart shows the status of conscription by country in 2023. Oh. Putting it in chat. Aha. Limited conscription. Red is conscription. Blue is no enforced. Gray is no armed forces, no information. So that's why they wanted to get Greenland. No armed forces. What do they have? A couple dog sleds, he said.
I didn't know Mexico had limited conscription. That's interesting. I'm going to read about that later.
Is Costa Rica blue on this?
It's nothing. It's the gray, because they don't have any military.
Okay, maybe I'm mixing up Costa Rica and Panama.
Well, Panama, I think, is also gray.
Huh.
Which country are you looking at?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Well,
Yeah, it's just the branch coming off of South America. It stays gray for a bit. That might be two countries. Is that Panama and Costa Rica?
Correct.
I see.
Yeah, they're both next to each other there. They're on that isthmus that connects North and South America.
What's this red country right here? The top of South America?
Top of South... Oh, Colombia.
Colombia has conscription. Interesting.
Yeah, they had a 50-year fucking civil war that lasted all through the Cold War, so not surprising.
Libya has no...
Well, Libya's kind of in the middle of a pseudo-cold civil war, so to speak. It never really ended, but it's not really ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably more no information, no data, because they don't have a government, technically.
Mm-hmm. Egypt and Turkey have conscription.
Yeah, no shock.
And Greece.
That's a little surprising. I would have thought Greece would have moved away from it like everybody else in Europe did.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like all of the Scandinavian countries have at least a little.
Mm-hmm. Is that Thailand has conscription?
Limited conscription. Yeah, the two red countries next to it are Vietnam and Laos.
Oh, Vietnam and Laos do. Taiwan as well.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Note that China has no enforced conscription.
Yeah. They have so many people. I feel like if you give fair wages, then you're going to drive jobs.
Yeah. There's generally more demand than jobs available, so they really don't have to worry about making people serve. There's always takers.
Djibouti.
Do they? Let's see. It's kind of hard to see. Let me zoom in here. No conscription for Djibouti.
I see.
Now you can see the red one next to Djibouti. That's Eritrea. They definitely have it.
What's this African country in the southern part that's red?
Angola.
Angola has conscription.
Yeah, that's another civil war country. Decades of civil war, sort of near the, starting 75 in the middle of the Cold War, lasted through the end of the Cold War for another decade or so.
Mm.
Yeah, generally, countries that experience a lot of conflict will maintain conscription even after it ends. Kind of a legacy institution.
Was that South Sudan that's red as well?
Yep, that's the other one there. It looks like all the Sahel countries have at least partial conscription.
Mm-hmm.
Wonder why that is. I guess they have been experiencing conflict, so probably why.
What's the gray country on the western part of North Africa?
That's Western Sahara.
Huh.
That's a controversial one. Morocco invaded and conquered it back in the 70s, I think. And it is de facto a part of Morocco right now. But it was never, their annexation was not legal and it was never internationally recognized. And so even decades later, Western Sahara still appears on maps as its own independent country. But it is effectively just Morocco now. So I think no data is technically what the gray there indicates.
How did they invade them? Just like they moved military stuff in and say this is ours now?
Yep. It was a decolonization thing. Western Sahara had been a Spanish territory. The Moroccans, for their part, had always claimed it as part of Morocco. But when they themselves were colonized, they obviously couldn't enforce it. So Morocco became independent in, I think it was the 1950s. They pushed the claim, but didn't want to go to war with a major European country. Although I guess Spain maybe wasn't that strong, but they didn't want to fuck with Spain. But then Spain eventually withdrew from their overseas territories, including Western Sahara. And at that point, Morocco took the opportunity to finally realize their claim, and they did so just by invading. It really wasn't hard. Western Sahara is mostly desert, and it has no large base of population at all. Like, I think when the invasion happened, the population was like 100,000 people, something like that.
That's very few, yeah.
Yeah, I think today it's 300,000, something in that range. Like, it's still not very much. And a good chunk of that population growth is actually Moroccans that moved into the newly conquered territory. So it's not even all ethnic Sauris. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. It's not even all native population. Let's put it like that. Yeah, it's still an outstanding issue. The UN issues proclamations occasionally condemning the occupation and asking the Moroccans to leave. But then they just ignore them, and nobody cares enough about Western Sahara to fuck with it. So it's just this ongoing running occupation that nobody knows about or gives a shit about.
Yeah, I would ask what their economy is based on, but with 100,000 people in that large of an area, it seems like they don't really have much stuff there.
Yeah, it's just natural resources. The Moroccans will build a mine here or there. But beyond that, there's really not much going on.
Does Switzerland have conscription?
Oh, yeah.
Chat was pointing out that Switzerland has a navy, even though they have no natural access to major bodies of water.
Really? Is that a Lake Geneva thing?
I don't know. It's not like a huge navy or anything, but they have something.
Yeah, I've heard of Hungary having a navy despite being landlocked, but that's just because they claimed territory on the coast and won it back. So they want to symbolically maintain the navy for the day that Hungary returns to its glorious roots as a coastal nation. But I never heard of Switzerland maintaining a navy like that. Interesting. What the fuck? I googled Swiss Navy and now I'm getting ads for lube.
Nani?
I guess Swiss Navy is a company that makes lube, apparently.
Was this a joke?
No.
Chat, did you bait us into a joke?
Wait, is it?
No, wait, no, I think it's legit. Merchant Marine of Switzerland is the largest merchant navy of landlocked country. Oh.
Oh, the Merchant Marine. Okay, that's not a navy, though. That's just like being flagged in Switzerland.
It's a brown water navy, so for rivers and lakes and stuff. I see. Huh.
Yeah, I could see them having a small force for like Lake Geneva or something like that. Because it is a relatively sizable lake.
What has Belarus been doing with the Ukraine stuff?
They've been pretty passive. I don't think they still let the Russian military operate in their territory, but they haven't been Well, they certainly haven't been launching ground operations into Ukraine again, but I don't think they've even really been launching aerial raids. I don't think I've heard about aircraft or missiles being launched from Belarusian territory into Ukraine. I would defer to chat on that. Maybe somebody paying more attention to Ukraine would know better, but yeah, it seems like Belarus has kind of taken itself out of the war for the most part. Been pretty quiet otherwise.
I see.
I haven't heard any new traction on unifying Russia with Belarus or anything like that. There had been some talk about it, some talk about that in the lead up and the aftermath to the immediate invasion of Ukraine. Yeah, one of the Russian analysts I follow has a pretty high opinion of Lukashenko as a leader. Not in the sense that he's a great leader, just that he's very smart. Very effective at staying in power and managing his authoritarian state. Kind of a savvy leader, so to speak. Much more so than Putin. He finds himself in spots occasionally where he's overly dependent on Russia or the West, and he always seems to find a way out of it. Very wily leader.
What's the African country on the eastern side that's yellow in the south?
Mozambique.
Mozambique.
Actually, it's similar to Angola in that they were both Portuguese colonies. And they both fought wars to eject the Portuguese that lasted about 10 years. And then after they successfully ejected the Portuguese, they both descended into civil wars that lasted for decades. Presumably that's why they have partial conscription. Kind of a legacy of the Civil War.
I see.
Yeah, there is a movement back towards conscription in Europe. There's been a lot of talk about that and some announcements.
Chat was asking earlier, do you know anything about a resource shortage that people are worried about in Europe? I guess based on the population density. The number that they threw out was 2050. They would be running out of certain resources.
I don't know what kind of resources they would be running out of. They're mostly self-sufficient with food, although they do still import a lot. Maybe some natural resources, like rare earths, tin, something like that, metals of one kind or another.
Fuel?
I don't think so. Fuel, oil could be a problem, but they're moving away from oil. They're trying intermittently in fits and starts to electrify their economy, so they're not dependent on oil imports anymore. I'm not sure what resources they would be hurting for in a few decades. Should be fine, as far as I know. Especially if they keep working on technological replacements for stuff they're overly dependent on imports in right now. Now, Germany has invested a lot in green hydrogen. Probably a long ways out from being commercially viable, but that could be an alternative source of heat for heavy industry in Germany at some point. So at that point, if they can make that work, they don't need oil or even necessarily natural gas to nearly the same degree that they do now. Yeah, technologically is kind of keeping pace with demand. Kind of waxes and wanes, obviously, depending on circumstances and different eras, but by and large, we are addressing the resource issue. The bigger issue is climate change and, at this point, conflict. Lots of wars going on right now, with potential upside for more.
Chat's saying that the male people from 18 to 45 need to ask the military if they want to leave for 3+ months. Is that just Germany or all of EU?
That's just Germany. That's a recent thing. I was actually reading about that too a couple days ago. Yeah, that was actually something they did during the Cold War. Like if you wanted to leave on a trip, you would have to ask permission for it first. But apparently it wasn't really enforced all that much. It wasn't all that intrusive back then. So reimposing it now is not thought to be any more imposing. A lot of people still oppose it anyway because they just don't like the general trend towards militarization.
That seems like a lot of bureaucratic work for not too much result.
Well, again, they don't really enforce it that much unless there's a crisis. That's how it worked before anyway. Presumably that's how it'll work again. Yeah, you just don't want a bunch of young men leaving the country just before you might be starting a war when you would need them. Yeah, people now have complained so much about the small size of Germany's military, they kind of forget what a beast it was during the Cold War. The German army in particular, or I guess more specifically the West German army, was one of the biggest in NATO during the Cold War. And they were considered pretty tough. They would have been right on the front line if shit started, so they had to be. Yeah, the German army only got small once the Cold War ended, when there wasn't seen to be a big threat. And everybody did that, even the United States.
Chat saying that Sweden traditionally had conscription. The end of the millennium went professional military, and then a few years ago turned back to conscription. Parentheses, thanks Putin.
Yeah. Yeah, the same impetus that got them into NATO. I still forget they're in NATO sometimes. They only joined, what, last year, 2 years ago, whenever it was?
Yeah, I was telling my dad at dinner, I was like, NATO is a mutual defense treaty. It's not a mutual attack treaty. So you can't just attack someone. It's like, all right, NATO, everyone attack. Autobots roll out.
Exactly. Yeah, our current government doesn't seem to understand or accept that. We'll see what happens.
Yep.
Not entirely optimistic, but it's not as though we haven't recovered from dumb shit before. So we're going to have to try to make that work this time.
That's true. Once again, to our lovely allies around the world, are bad. Okay. Sorry.
We're working on it.
Yep.
It's definitely at a low point now, and will probably go lower, knowing the Trump administration. But it's important not to give up. We don't really have a lot of alternatives, so we just got to stick it out and make do as best we can until we can inflict some real change.
I want an eloquent executive next. Whoever wins. I would like some crisp verbiage. I would like some charisma with technically correct English. I would like consistency and structure. That would be nice.
Yeah, it's been 12 years now since we've had 13 years now since we've had a president like that.
A president who is eloquent?
Yeah.
When did we have Obama? He's pretty eloquent.
16? That's when he left office.
Oh. Yeah. There was someone in chat who was like, the Democrats lost to this? And I just immediately can see zombie Biden. Like, oh no. He's so old. He was just too old. We olded out.
Yeah.
You old out and you're unable to be coherent. Because I think Biden, he was more of a like savvy and sharp politician throughout his career. And it's like specifically during his presidential term, he's second out. He's outie 5,000.
Yeah, I'm really interested in, I'm interested in how historians remember this whole era. Because it's nothing if not colorful. Mm-hmm. But I'm also kind of interested in what the Biden administration's legacy will be. Because it's kind of unusual just to have a one-term president that just runs for office, runs for re-election, and then drops out. The whole thing is very strange.
Yeah. I don't know. Getting another younger president, like a Kennedy age, would be interesting. It would shake things up a lot. But with advances in medical tech, we tend to live older and older, so we've been throwing some very old people into politics. Because it takes a long time to climb, so...
Well, we'll see. I don't think there's any older politicians right now that are kind of looking set to win the presidency in the next election.
Mm.
Because what Gavin Newsom is running, probably one of either J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio seems probable, although there's nothing official yet. So that's kind of a younger cohort.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see who we ultimately end up with, but there are some younger guys in the running at least.
I feel like Rubio is more coherent. I haven't really listened to a ton of Vance and Rubio, but I think Vance seems more kind of MAGA. Just kind of, I wouldn't say brain rot, but it's kind of their stuff.
Yeah, Vance is more the brain rot guy. He's kind of leaned into the online, chronically online right. Marco Rubio is more of an establishment guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like actually, before he joined the Trump administration, he was actually considered one of the more Trump skeptical Republican senators.
Mm. Ted Cruz will run. Yeah, and if things ever get bad, he can always go to Cancun.
Is Ted Cruz going to run? I don't know. Kind of got the shit knocked out of him back in 2016. Yeah, I don't know if he has it in him.
He doesn't have the Riz.
Yeah, he was pretty energetic in 2016. He was kind of coming off of that Tea Party high when he was one of their leading politicians, but Trump flanked him from the right. Like, just went even further right and kind of stole his thunder, and he was never really as prominent in news cycles as he was before then. So yeah, and it's been a long time. So it's been like a decade plus.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Cruz is still interested. He might try, but I don't think his odds are good. I think the Tea Party moment was his opportunity, and he missed it.
Newsom will win over the men's men, got the whole talking shit mentality. And then someone else is saying, as a Californian, fuck Newsom. I've heard similar stuff to this. People on the right kind of like how Newsom talks, even if they don't want a leftist per se. And the fact that a lot of left-leaning Californians don't like him only makes the people on the right like him more. So he's kind of centrist, I guess?
He's center-left, I would say, from my understanding. I think we've got somebody...
He's a Macron kind of guy.
Well, I think some of the chat guys live in California. That you could probably ask them, and they would know better than me.
Yeah.
I'm more versed in like Texas politics, but my understanding is that he's more like, yeah, like you say, Macron style center left.
Mm-hmm. Corpo shill. Okay, I see. Yeah, there's the other term that you had, which was a social climber. A social climber doesn't have issues that they're advocating for. They're advocating for their own power and advancement. So they can play for Team Blue, they can play for Team Red. They don't give a fuck. They want to win, personally.
Yeah, they'll make a lot of trade-offs to make it happen, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Bernie Sanders is kind of an opposite of that, where the people with money he is yelling at. The pharmaceutical companies, he's like yelling at them. So they're not going to want to work with him. They don't want him to win. And then other social climbers who just want to advance themselves, they're more willing to be corrupt and broker deals and so on.
Yeah.
They're not going to stick to principles that are going to cause damage to industries.
Yeah, I don't really know who is going to, I don't want to say replace, but who's going to fill Bernie Sanders' role going forward? Like, who's the lodestar for the progressive left going forward?
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know who that's going to be.
Yeah, we need unity on some issues, I think, is a difficult point. That was one of the things that kind of slapped me in the face when I went to the Occupy protests back in the day, was that you can go to a protest and there are a lot of, quote, well-intentioned people, but they have a lot of different issues, and they don't really all speak the same talking points. They're there for their own issue that they've been yelling about grouchily for 20 years. They're not necessarily there for the specific thing that this protest was made for. So similarly, like finding the cohesive issues of a political leaning, like what are the main things that a left-leaning person would want to go to bat for right now, and what are the main things that a right-leaning person would want to go to bat for, and how can you find some overlap there? Because in theory, there's a lot that the country can agree is just a problem. And then if you can fix that shared problem, then you're making a very productive use of government. But as you pointed out with elections and stuff, there are these like wag the dog issues that we're never going to agree on, but they throw out there because it makes their talking points more snazzy, like the abortion issue. That was like, it's brought up every election cycle, but when it's not an election cycle, it's not talked about that much. But when they're trying to pick a fight, they'll bring it up. When they could just calmly agree, like, we have this shared issue over here, we're not going to be able to agree to terms on abortion, so we'll just let that stay as it is, and we'll focus on something else. But that makes them look weak ideologically to the people who are rabid, so
Yeah.
it's tough to win.
Yeah, I think it's harder to be well, I was about to say I think it's harder to be an ideologue now, but there's certainly quite a few ideologues around, so maybe that's not true. But just ideology in general is just less coherent now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, especially the populist iteration has done a lot of damage to a lot of ideological narratives. The dog caught the car too many times now for people to pretend that something would happen if it did.
Mm-hmm.
So now the veil has been lifted, and we can see a lot of that was bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, ideology has always been a shorthand, you know, a kind of heuristic to navigate a complex world, but you don't necessarily need heuristics if you can just Google the answer.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as useful anymore.
And you can get a semi-incorrect AI-generated answer at the top as well.
Yeah, I wonder how many people are just going to have their politics be defined by half-assed answers from robots.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly a great opportunity for corruption there for the companies that program them. You can imagine something like SEO for AI companies trying to manipulate people into believing things.
Well, we'll have to try our best in navigating it. But very good. We ended up being able to find lots of fun stuff to talk about, aside from just the Iran conflict. But for those who missed it, we covered a lot of that as well. We started with the Artemis program, which I discussed at the beginning. That's very exciting, more of a science thing than a foreign policy thing. But finding any positive news that you can, I think, is good and refreshing, helps to keep your morale. Oh, for another random one that I saw, I think there's been a few major laws passed in India and maybe Thailand regarding elephant use. So that's a win for elephants. They're not going to be as abused through those industries. Generally, those things where they make elephants do tricks, it's not actually nice behind the curtain, where it's like if elephant doesn't do trick, you hit elephant. So then elephant does trick. But it's not like, oh, that's so sweet that he does that. It's like, no, if he doesn't do that, he gets hit. So, a win for the elephants. Good job. And there was also I think they're trying to cultivate a fungus that they found in the Amazon that eats plastic.
Oh.
So I'm not sure if we're going to have a replacement of the Pacific garbage patch to be a giant Pacific mushroom patch. But if the fungus takes over the planet because of this, that would be an interesting way to go out. What's the IP that has fungus zombies? Is that Last of Us? Yeah, Last of Us 2.0.
Oh, right. Gotcha. Well, hopefully they can safely develop that. That would be really cool technology to have.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me on again.
Yes, sir. Well, I will get some rest tonight. I have to get up earlier tomorrow. We have a Zerg coaching session. That'll be earlier than my normal hours, but it works with the students, so I will get some rest as well.
Gotcha.
But very good chat. Very good, Agent Smith. Thank you, Fuzzy Cord, for handling questions. And thank you, mods in general, for keeping the peace in the chat. We did have a couple timeouts and bans today due to insulting behavior from people. So thanks, mods, for smacking people. And just generally, if you're a viewer and you want to appeal to me by saying that you love me and my mods suck and then dissing them, that's not going to work. Because the people who have been like maintaining the integrity of the stream and keeping up the rules and so on, they've done a lot of work for me that's like piled up of like merits. So they have like a pile of merits over here, and you're like, Neuro, I love you, like we're cool, right? Fuck them. It's not gonna work. Because I look at your merits and it was 11 messages in the chat so far. That's not very heavyweight. But thank you to our mods, thank you to our regulars, thank you, Agent Smith, and we will see you the next episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith.
Yeah, thanks again. Always a privilege. Talk to you next time.
GG. And do a 15-minute walk.
Oh, fuck.
Got him at the end.